Camping alone can be terrifying, especially when something's hunting you. The screams echoed through the trees. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. All I knew was they were loud, which meant they were close. As I listened to the high-pitched shrieks, it almost sounded like a couple of people having a shouting match. If I had been at my apartment in town, that's exactly what I would have thought the sound was. But then the pitch changed, and it took on a feral quality. I knew whoever or whatever was making the sound. I wanted nothing to do with them. Thinking you're alone in the wilderness is one thing. It gives a certain freeing feeling like you're so close to nature. But knowing you're alone and hearing the terrifying, nearly indescribable sound sent chills down my spine. I quickly questioned how much longer I would be alone, or alive. Did those things know I was here? Were they planning their attack? Or was it just a gathering of something, like a harmless chill session in the woods, in the dead of night? Survival instinct was screaming for me to get out of there as quickly as possible. To hell with the tent and my supplies. Just leave. For a brief moment, I nearly listened. Later, I would wish I had. Fortunately, I hadn't made a fire yet and decided against one now. If by some miracle those things didn't know I was here, a fire would draw them in like flies to, well, something I didn't want to be in. Even though the screaming was still going at a fever pitch, I quietly snuck into my tent and zipped it shut, as if some flimsy material would magically keep at bay whatever beasts were raging out there. Searching through my pack, I found my Swiss Army knife and kept it firm in my grasp as I lay down on my sleeping bag. I didn't dare settle in for the night. Sleeping through being attacked by wild whatevers and torn to shreds can be bad for my health. As I lay there, eyes wide, listening to the horrible shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere, they suddenly stopped. At first, this was a relief, but when the sound stopped, so did all other noises of the forest. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on all of nature. I heard a loud thumping sound that sounded like drums beating faster and faster until I realized it was my heart. Trying to calm myself so I didn't have a heart attack on the spot was a challenge. I tried to think of calm blue oceans and sunrises, of beautiful things that had nothing to do with the situation I was in. Apparently I did my job too well. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in a panic. Jumping up, I looked all around for the beasts that were coming to get me. When all that stared back at me were the contents of my backpack and the four walls of the tent, I allowed myself to take a few deep breaths. It was morning. The sun was up, and the birds were singing. I took both of those as good signs. Being alive was a bonus as well. It was decision time. Do I pack up and cut my trip short by 2 days, or do I write off last night's incident as a rare occurrence and not worry about it today in the daylight as the sun's rays bathed me in warmth? It's funny how fear manifests itself so much stronger at night. Last night, the forest seemed like the most horrifying place I'd ever been. Today, it looks like all the beauty of nature is spread out before me. I couldn't imagine anything bad happening in such a picturesque place. As I looked out over the clearing in the woods, I saw a large, dark spot that was moving towards me. I dove into my tent and emerged with a pair of binoculars. Peering through them, I saw the spot was a bear, and it was headed my way. So much for nothing bad happening in nature. My plan of action was to hide and hope it went away, or turned down another path before it got here. That plan didn't work out so well. Within 15 minutes, I could hear it snuffling around the campsite looking for something to eat. I hoped it wouldn't be eating fresh camper. The can of bear spray was firmly in my hand with my white knuckles clenching it. Having it was one thing, using it was another. That was my last resort. Spray and run. The sniffing got louder, and I could see the bottom edges of tent being pushed in by a large nose. My knuckles grew a little whiter as I followed its progress along the edge and around the tent. And then there was a pause. A dreadful pause. The kind of pause that horrible decisions are born from. I was contemplating my own horrible decision when the sniffing started again, this time leading away from the tent. Breathing a cautiously optimistic sigh of relief, I opened the tent flap just enough to see the bear lumbering off into the woods. Again, I held a silent vote, just like the song said, should I stay or should I go? I'd only been camping up here once before, but I didn't remember it being this dangerous. Maybe I just got lucky last time. Not wanting my luck to run out, I packed up my tent and got ready to leave. The sun was already high in the sky, leaving me just a few hours to hike out what took me a full day to hike in. I looked for bear tracks to see which way it had left, but the ground was dry, so there was nothing to see. Crossing my fingers, I headed out on the trail, hoping it had gone some other way. It was easy going, making the terror of last night fade even more. I still kept a wary eye for the bear, though. No use in getting so caught up in nature that I ignore her dangers. After around an hour of walking, I found a large rock on the side of the trail and decided to take a break. Pulling out a granola bar and a bottle of water, I looked around as I snacked. There was a clearing in the woods and a rough path leading to it. It wasn't any official path, just one that happens when a lot of feet go the same way and tramp down the foliage. There was a faint whiff of smoke coming from the clearing, but I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. My curiosity wanted to see what was there, but my common sense said no way. In the end, curiosity fought dirty and said the smoke meant there had been a fire and the ashes could blow into the trees if the wind picked up and cause a wildfire. It was a good point, even though the wind was uncannily still at the moment. I took a quick look around to make sure the bear wasn't sneaking up on me, then started down the narrow path. The trees blocked out some of the light as I headed down the path toward the clearing, making me literally descend into darkness. It wasn't a good feeling. My eyes darted around, looking for anything out of the ordinary, and I slowed my pace. Then suddenly the trees opened up, and daylight shone brightly on the clearing and the remnants of a fire with a wisp of smoke still rising. Whoever had made it had been dangerously uncaring about the safety of the woods. The fire sat right in the middle of a patch of grass, with no ring of stones surrounding it. My ire rose at the carelessness of this person. I found myself wishing very bad things on them when I noticed something else. There were splotches of red all around the fire. It was like someone had spilled red paint all around. It was strange. Why would someone bring paint out here to the middle of the woods? I stalked around the other side of the fire looking for the answer to this mystery. Unfortunately, I found it. There was something pale sitting just outside the burnt grass of the fire. It was next to a splotch of red. I bent down and moved the grass to see more clearly. Picking it up, I saw it was a severed human toe. I dropped it and stood up like a shot. The red splotches made sense to me now. They weren't paint, they were blood. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt very alone and surrounded. My eyes darted all around the clearing and into the trees as I did a slow circle, searching for whatever was about to attack. As I searched, I saw the red splotches led off into the woods in the opposite direction of the trail. Curiosity tried to get me to follow, but I told it to shut the hell up and hightailed it out of there, my head on a swivel searching for threats. Just as I was about to reach the main trail, I literally ran into the bear. I'd been so busy watching behind me for whatever might be chasing me that I didn't see what was in front of me. It turned to face me, showing its red teeth. Then it stood on its hind legs, dwarfing me, and roared. I wished I'd worn the brown pants because I soiled myself in fear. I was so terrified I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. It dropped back down onto its front legs and approached me, teeth bared. I knew right then it was responsible for the screams and the dismembered toe. The only thing I couldn't figure out was the fire. I'd never heard of bears being able to start a fire. This was unfortunately the last thought going through my head before being eaten. It sniffed and took a step back. If I'd known dropping a load in my pants would save me, I would have done it last night. As I looked into the eyes of my death, it wasn't looking back at me. It was looking past me. I wasn't sure what kind of trick this bear was pulling. It wasn't like it had to fool me or anything. It had me dead to rights. Curiosity made me turn and follow the bear's gaze. I instantly regretted it. Standing near the clearing was a monster. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It stood on hind legs, at least 8 feet tall. It had the horns of a deer, but the face looked like a deer's skull with no skin on it. Its shoulders were covered in what looked like a cloak made of another animal's skin. The bear let out a deep growl full of menace. I took the opportunity to back away and allow the bear a clear path to its adversary. It glanced at me for a moment, then started toward the monster. As soon as it was past me, I dropped my pack and ran down the trail with every ounce of speed I could muster. It didn't matter that my car was miles away. It didn't matter, there was no way I could sprint all the way there without collapsing and having a heart attack. Just then I heard the fight. The growling, roaring, slashing, knocking trees down. Fight that would have been awesome to watch from inside a bunker with 2-foot-thick concrete walls. Just me, alone, without a rocket launcher to defend myself. There was no way I was sticking around. I ran for a solid 10 minutes before the stitch in my side told me I had to at least slow to a walk. I didn't dare stop. I knew I had to keep moving. It was my only chance of surviving by some miracle. The sounds of the fight echoed throughout the trees, making it seem surreal to hear it, then hear it echo back again. It sounded like the fight was slowing down. I hoped it would last for a while longer. Maybe whichever one would forget about me or be too tired to track me down. My walk had become a limp. I was nearly out of energy and had a mile to go to the relative safety of my car. Surely by now I could take it easy. As the thought rolled through my brain, the sounds of the fight ceased. The fading echo was all that remained. I wondered which one had been victorious and comforted myself that the victor was surely enjoying the spoils by feasting on the fallen adversary. But in the back of my mind, unease grew. What if it didn't forget me? What if it was following me right now? I found myself walking a little faster, much to the pain and chagrin of my legs. The silence that fell in the aftermath of the fight was disconcerting. The animals around me that had been chattering away, suddenly falling silent, was alarming. I started jogging, each step a new exercise in pain. There was no doubt I was being followed. The footsteps behind me were getting louder by the moment. My car was in sight. I was almost free. The footsteps behind me were very loud now. I knew it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Run, don't think, just run, my thoughts screamed at me. Even my curiosity had no desire to look back. 10 steps from the car, I dug in my pocket looking for my keys. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't find them. Then I dug a little deeper and came away with my prize. I hit the remote to unlock the car and dove into the driver's seat. The engine had just roared to life when the monster appeared. I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, whipping around and making the monster miss, crashing through the windshield. I jammed it into drive and floored it as the monster recovered and started after me. For a long, horrid moment, it seemed to be catching up to me. The road was gravel and had several potholes in it. I found myself swerving to miss the biggest ones so my car wouldn't bottom out. But by doing so, the monster gained ground. It was almost within reach of my rear bumper when I slid sideways onto the main road. Once on the pavement, I floored it and watched with satisfaction as the monster fell behind. I breathed a sigh of relief as I relaxed and settled in for the ride home. It wasn't long until I was pulling into my driveway and parking. My head fell back against the headrest, and I was tempted to take a nap right there when my nose reminded me of the state of my pants. Walking in empty-handed was a mixed blessing. I'd left hundreds of dollars in equipment behind, but at least I was alive. My shower called to me. I stripped, threw my pants and underwear in the trash, then settled into the longest, most rewarding shower of my life. After drying, I threw on a Metallica t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I came back out to the living room and settled in to watch a movie. Horror was out. I knew I'd have nightmares for weeks about my ordeal. I decided to watch an episode of Wipeout. 3 episodes later, I found my eyelids fighting gravity and exhaustion. Heading to bed, I turned out the lights and stepped up to the living room window. Looking out over the lights of town, I sighed, seeing the trees of the park far in the distance and knowing I'd never visit there again. Before I turned toward my bedroom, something caught my eye. It was impossible. I rubbed my eyes to be sure. The monster was creeping out of the woods and coming straight toward my house. As I watched, it looked up and saw me. Our eyes locked. Mine full of fear. It's full of menace. I ran through the house making sure every door and window was locked. After that, I went to my bedstand and pulled out my snub-nosed .38, checking to make sure it was loaded and grabbing a handful of extra bullets, shoving them in my pocket. Running back out to the living room, I looked out the window, but it was gone. Pressing my face against the glass, I searched the front yard, but it wasn't there. For an instant, I wondered if my imagination had been playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen window and looked into the backyard. It was dark, and I couldn't see much. Reaching for the light switch, I hesitated, not wanting to see it suddenly appear in front of me. But I had to know if this thing was real or not. I would rather go crazy than ever see that thing again. Flicking on the light, I took a half step back. Nothing was there. I scanned the entire backyard, all the way to the woods that bordered my property. Nothing. I shrugged and was about to go to bed when I heard it. My foot stopped on the first step, and I turned back toward the door. Someone or something was scraping against the front door. Feeling like I was in a trance, I was drawn to the door. Leaning up to the peephole, I closed my eyes and breathed a silent prayer that nothing would be there. My prayers were answered. There was nothing out there. As tempted as I was to just accept this audible hallucination, my shaking hand reached for the doorknob. The distance between my hand and the door seemed to fade, like one of those scenes in a horror movie where the camera zooms in while going backward. I turned the knob and held my breath while opening the door. Nothing was there. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Looking around, the yard was empty, just the evening mist clinging to the lawn. My imagination had gotten the best of me. I turned to go back inside and saw the door and door frame had long scratches on it. My blood froze. It was real. It was here. It had tracked me down. As terror gripped me, I saw a flash of brown fur an instant before it charged me. In sheer desperation, I fell back into the door just as it hit the doorframe. Its antlers slammed into the doorframe, sending splinters flying as it struggled to get loose from the destroyed wood. I lay on the door, watching in grim fascination, stunned by the fact that it had missed gouging my eyes by a mere fraction of an inch. The doorway had saved me. The same doorway that was rapidly disappearing under the monster's onslaught. I regained myself and ran. As I darted through the living room, somehow, I had the presence of mind to grab the house phone and dial 911 as I headed down the basement steps, slamming the door behind me. 911. What's your emergency? Came the lady operator's voice. I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me, I said, vaulting down the stairs. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me. Are you talking about a person? No, what do you not understand about the word monster? I shouted. All right, it's my duty to inform you that prank calls will be reported to the police and you could face charges. Fine, send the cops. Maybe they can fight off the monster long enough to put me in cuffs. The line disconnected. Son of a... I said, as I heard the monster stalking around inside the house. I squeezed myself into the far corner between the wall and the oil tank and tried to be as quiet as possible. Barely breathing, I listened to its measured steps as it crept from room to room. The floorboards complained with loud creaks, telling me this thing weighed considerably more than me. I heard it turn toward the stairs and thought about making a run for the cellar door that led outside when my phone rang. Hello, I screamed, trying to be as quiet as possible. Is this the person who just called 911 about a monster? Yes, who is this? There was a pause as I heard the footsteps change direction. I'm from another agency, he said. Could you describe the monster for me? So you're from one of those 3-letter agencies that always say they don't spy on our phone calls? Could you describe the monster for me? It's huge, I whispered. At least 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and wearing the fur of another animal over its shoulders. Oh, and it has antlers, like a deer. I heard a sharp intake of air. Where is it? I gave him my address. I meant, where is it in the house? It's on the first floor and I'm in the basement, I whispered. But I think it's coming down here. Just then, I heard the basement door open. Gotta go, I whispered, then hung up the phone. The basement stairs groaned under the weight. I hoped that the wood would collapse under the weight and it would fall, snapping its neck. No such luck. The stairs creaked as it continued to the bottom. I had to duck in this basement, so I was sure it was on all fours to keep from getting tangled in the rafters. My heart pounded. I struggled to keep my breathing quiet so I wouldn't give away my position. The chuffing of the monster's breathing was getting closer. I wanted to close my eyes but had to know when it came close enough. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. Aiming it at the corner, I waited. The skeletal snout appeared, but I didn't shoot. The shot would just bounce off of bone. I wanted to hit something more vital and hope that I might somehow survive. The rest of the bony skull made its appearance and went by without noticing me. Next came the neck and the rest of the body. I wasn't sure where this thing's vital organs were, so I held off, hoping that it might not notice me at all. Those hopes were dashed when it sniffed, then whipped around and stared right at me. I took that as a sign to shoot it in the chest. The gunshot was deafening, especially in such a closed space. My ears were ringing so loud I could barely hear the monster screaming and tearing my oil tank limb from limb, trying to get to me. I fired again, trying to hit any part of its body as oil flew from it, thrashing around. We were both covered in heating oil, and yet it still kept coming. 3 more shots didn't even slow it down. It was so close the muzzle of the gun was nearly touching it. I shoved the barrel in one of its eye sockets and pulled the trigger. The flame from the exploding gunpowder set the oil on fire. I don't know if it was that or the bullet bouncing around in its skull that made it shriek even louder. Flame engulfed its screaming form, making it look like a demon straight from hell. It ran out of the basement through the outside doors, bursting out into the open air and disappearing into the night. I was so relieved I didn't notice right away that I was on fire. The oil that had splashed on me had ignited when the monster caught fire. I tried to push my way out quickly, but the monster had shoved the tank closer to the wall, pinning me. The fire devoured the oil on my clothes and my bare skin, making me scream in agony as I tried in vain to get away from the fire. This was it. I would die this horrible, agonizing death, trapped in an inferno. The monster would get its revenge and not even know it. Maybe once it extinguished its own fire, it would come back and devour what was left of me, like a well-done steak. I must have been hallucinating. I could have sworn a cloud enveloped me just before I died. Number sign. I woke in a white room with an annoying beeping sound that wouldn't stop. There was a smiling face sitting in the corner, staring back at me, attached to a man I'd never met. "How are you feeling?" he said, stepping over to the hospital bed. "Am I dead?" I rasped. "Not yet," he chuckled. "It was close, though. If we hadn't gotten to you when we did, you would have been a shish kebab." I tried to lean up, but pain put me back in the bed. "Yeah. You're not going to be taking any hiking trips for a while," he said. "You've got burns all over your legs that'll need some time to heal." "I'm never going hiking again," I said. "Are you the guy I talked to on the phone?" "Yeah. Do you mind telling me the rest of what happened?" he said, pulling out a pen and notepad. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "Since you saved my life, it's the least I could do." He pulled his chair over and got comfortable. "What happened to the monster anyway?" I said. He hesitated. "It got away, didn't it?" "Yeah," he said, lowering his head a little. "We lost the trail after it extinguished itself, but don't worry, we'll find it." I didn't comment on my opinion of the competency of government agencies out of respect for the man who saved my life, but suffice it to say I wouldn't be sleeping very deeply once I got back home. "Where would you like me to start?" I said. "The beginning is always a good place." My girlfriend took me camping. I just want to start by saying that dating is hard. Once you get past all the bots, ads, and scammers and meet a real person, the guessing game begins. Why is this person actually available right now? Are they really just down on their luck, or is it something else that you're happier not knowing? Then, once you figure out their deep, dark secrets, the question becomes, are they willing to put up with your deep, dark secrets? This process can take weeks to sort out, usually resulting in a dead end somewhere, forcing you to start over. The whole thing is frustrating, demeaning, and humiliating enough that you're physically and emotionally exhausted, making you just want to give up and be a loner. Now I know what you're wondering. What's this got to do with anything? Well, it's kinda simple. A little bit ago, I wrote about how my girlfriend, Wendy, never eats and that I heard some unsettling things at her house the last time I visited. Well, I decided to keep seeing Wendy. Sure, she might have some unusual habits, but she makes me feel good about myself and I'm happy with her. So what if she never eats or chases off bears while nude in the middle of the night? Compared to returning to the dating scene, that's really not so bad. We even have nicknames for each other now. Country girl and city boy. I'll let you guess which is which. Anyway, that's a rather long and roundabout way of saying that, yeah, I went on that camping trip with her, and things didn't go quite how I expected. First off, I want to say that she was right. The forest really is beautiful. The sun's heat, combined with the coolness of the shade, while listening to the insects drone lazily in the background, seems to slow time to a crawl, making each breath a relaxing experience in and of itself. It's entirely unlike anything you'll experience during your morning commute. Combine all that with the right company, and soon you'll wonder why you'd ever return. And let me tell you, Wendy is 100% the right company. Wendy was quick with tips to make the hike easier, from how to properly distribute your pack load to how to lace your shoes for maximum comfort. During the trek to where we were going to set up camp, she alternated between offering interesting bits of information about the local flora and fauna and walking in silence, allowing me to get lost in the experience. The whole affair made me want to give up the city life and move to the country. There was just one thing during the walk that wasn't as pleasant as everything else. At one point, we must have walked too close to a skunk or a rotting carcass or something because the whole area around us started to reek. At first, it wasn't so bad, but eventually, it got so strong it made me want to gag. I jokingly mentioned it to Wendy, but she just looked ahead like she was determined and told me, "Pick up the pace. We'll be past it soon enough." Sure enough, we eventually got past the smell, and things quickly became pleasant again. The rest of the hike passed without incident, and Wendy even helped me set up the tent. Her evident experience in the matter showed through because it took no time. Soon enough, everything was ready, and we even had a nice cheerful fire roaring. This time, when she pulled out the supplies for dinner, I didn't even bat an eye when it was clearly only enough for one. Whatever was going on with her, this was just the way it was going to be. It was up to me to accept that or move on, and I'd made my call. But I have to say, for someone who never seems to eat, she sure knows how to sear a steak to perfection. After a pleasant evening and an even more pleasant night, we passed out in the tent together while listening to the crickets and the more distant owls. But of course, if that's all that happened, I wouldn't be writing about it here. Sometime during the night, I awoke to find I was alone in the tent. This wasn't too unexpected because Wendy was both an outdoor enthusiast and a bit of a night owl. I debated calling out to her, but something in the air felt like I shouldn't disturb it with such an out-of-place sound. However, Mother Nature did have her demands, and it was time to answer her call. As I unzipped the tent and stepped out, I couldn't help but look up into the night sky. The stars were breathtaking. You never see this many this vibrant in the city. However, their beauty couldn't distract me for long in the face of more urgent demands. Do you know that feeling when you've been holding it in a little too long and finally experience relief? If it weren't for my experiences earlier that night, I might be tempted to claim it is better than sex, but we'll just say it was still pretty euphoric. Maybe it distracted me from the fact that all the usual night sounds had suddenly gone quiet, but it couldn't distract me from the sudden smell of rotting flesh. It was even stronger than it had been on the trail and was accompanied by the kind of fear that you usually feel when you're very young and just starting to wonder if there might be reasons sounds go bump in the night. I gagged as I struggled to cut off the stream, zip up my pants, and retreat into the tent again. Once in the tent, I reached for the flashlight, then hesitated. I desperately wanted to see better, but something in the back of my mind told me it was better to remain hidden. Of course, I don't know how well hidden a blue tent in the middle of the forest can be, but turning on a flashlight would be like activating a beacon for everything within a few miles to see. I sat in the dark for I don't know how long, feeling my heart pound through my chest, loud enough that I was sure whatever was out there could hear it clearly. Thankfully, the smell eventually faded, but I was still so high on adrenaline that I knew I wouldn't sleep another wink for the rest of the night. Or so I thought. The following day, I awoke with Wendy cuddled in my arm, with one of her legs and arms draped over me, and once again, she was totally nude. Now, I was pretty sure she'd put on some pajamas before going to bed, but as she stirred and I got a good look at what was on display, I suddenly didn't care all that much. Eventually, she smiled lazily up at me and spoke. "You sleep all right, city boy?" You seem to have some pretty rough dreams in the middle of the night." At the time, those words made perfect sense. In the light of day, it seemed pretty clear that whatever happened last night was probably just a vivid dream brought on by the experiences of the day before and an unfamiliar environment. After a bit more time together, we decided to get up and tackle another day in the forest. However, when I finally crawled out of the tent, I could see our entire camp was in disarray. It was like something had gone through and tossed everything around. A few of the more delicate items were totally demolished. After a moment, I called out, Hey, you might want to take a look at this." As Wendy crawled out of the tent, she made a face. Must have been a bear. They usually don't come out this way, so I wasn't too worried about them. I guess that's on me, sorry. A bear, that kind of made sense. At least I told myself so. As we were cleaning up, I even saw tracks, though. In my inexperience as a city boy, I would have said they belonged to a dog, not a bear. A huge dog. Maybe a wolf? What was even odder was when I found what looked like hoof prints. Looking at the prints, I realized that deer must be much bigger than they look on TV since they were more than twice as long as my hand. There isn't much more to say about the day. We fixed the place up, had breakfast, went on a hike, made dinner, and called it a night, with a few other minor activities sprinkled throughout. I was back to enjoying the trip, so much so that I had mostly forgotten about the night before. But that night is when things took a bit of an unexpected turn. Once again, I awoke in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I wasn't alone this time, as Wendy was still asleep, half on top of me again. However, that stench was back and stronger than ever. It was amazing how bright it seemed in the tent. It must have been a full moon, or at least nearly full, because I could clearly see the shadow of a large deer pass between us and the night sky. But there was something wrong with this deer. It was clearly too tall, as if it was standing on hind legs, and when it opened its mouth, I could even make out a mouthful of very sharp teeth. I couldn't help it. I felt myself breathing more heavily by the second as my heart rate skyrocketed. My mind went blank when I suddenly felt Wendy stir. Remembering the presence of my considerably smaller girlfriend, I suddenly felt protective, as if I couldn't let anything happen to her. I was just about to tell her to be quiet when I noticed her looking up at me with a finger on her lips as if telling me to do the same. Then she whispered to me, "Stay in the tent," and started to get up. I don't know what I was thinking or if I was thinking. All I knew was I couldn't let Wendy go out to face whatever that was, so I reached out and grabbed her wrist before she could exit the tent. However, when she looked back at me, I released her immediately, almost as scared of her as whatever was outside the tent. Her eyes reflected light back at me like a cat's, and I could see the nails on her hand growing as I watched. In half a moment, she turned back around, opened the tent, and climbed outside. I will never forget the sound I heard at that moment. After I got home, I looked up the calls of a bunch of wild animals, and in hindsight, I'd say it was like a compilation of an elk call, a rabbit scream, and a mountain lion scream, but impossibly loud. Wendy shouted in answer, her tiny human voice sounding so frail in comparison. At least it did, until it started to change, morphing and twisting into the howl of an impossibly large wolf. I couldn't help it. I peeked out the tent flap, and standing in front of the tent was what I could only describe as a werewolf. The little 5 foot and change Wendy was now standing at least 7 feet tall, covered in fur with claws and fangs that looked like they could tear through steel, and she looked ready for murder. Then, some movement on the opposite end of our camp drew my attention, and I witnessed a living nightmare that suddenly made a werewolf seem like less of a problem. It looked kind of like a deer if a deer had more articulated limbs far too long for its body. The feet ended in hooves, but the hands ended in long bony claws. The whole thing looked desiccated, its skin drawn so tight over its ribs and arms you could make out the skeleton beneath. The fur was spotty and looked partially rotted, with open holes leaking bodily fluids that should never see light. Its teeth were long and serrated, clearly meant for tearing rather than chewing. I sometimes hear hunters talking about deer being 8 or 10 points, but if I had to estimate, This thing had a 30-point antler, with many of the tines covered in what I suspected to be dried viscera from previous victims. The two monsters charged each other. The nightmare, which I now know was a Wendigo, lowered its head, intending to impale its opponent, but at the last second, Wendy threw herself nearly flat on the ground, only to rocket up into the Wendigo, latching onto its long neck with her powerful jaws, while her hind feet kicked gouges into its vulnerable stomach. However, the Wendigo didn't seem willing to give up that easily and tossed Wendy aside. She hit the ground hard and was soon set upon by the other monster. She raised an arm to defend herself, only for the Wendigo to latch on with its own teeth, easily tearing through her skin and muscles. With a powerful kick, Wendy pushed the nightmare back, then started swiping at him over and over, making it lose ground. However, lowering its head, the Wendigo charged forward again, and this time, Wendy wasn't fast enough as the Wendigo caught her on his antlers and flipped her over his back, with new blood darkening the tips of the tines. But that was its downfall as Wendy sprung up and again latched onto its neck with her teeth, this time from behind. The nightmare struggled in vain, occasionally raking Wendy with his claws, but she refused to let go and began ripping and tearing her way through its neck until she grabbed hold of its antlers, and with one final jerk, the head came free. I don't have the heart to describe what came next, but let's just say the sound of flesh being torn and eaten is much more distinct through the thin membrane of a tent than a closed cabin window. Time passed. At least an hour, maybe 2 or 3. It's hard to say for sure. I don't know what I expected to happen next. Maybe I was going to be next, or perhaps I'd wake up from this nightmare. But eventually, the adrenaline passed. My eyes grew heavy, and I fell asleep again. When I awoke in the morning, I was alone this time. There was no sign Wendy had come back. I'd half hoped she'd still be here, telling me I'd had another nightmare, but I don't think I would have believed it again. It was kind of sad and lonely packing up our things by myself. I debated bringing Wendy's stuff with me, but I'm not that good of a hiker and wasn't confident I could pull it off. So I just left her things in her pack inside the tent. When I exited the tent, I was more than a little surprised to see Wendy sitting calmly by the fire pit with no wounds in sight. She smiled sadly. "So I guess I owe you an explanation." I remember hesitating, my mind blank, before I settled on the thought I had earlier. "What, you're not going to try and convince me it was a nightmare again?" She looked around at all the destruction in the campsite. Earth was kicked up. Trees had claw marks gouged out, and there were signs of blood splatter everywhere. "I didn't think I could convince you this time." I nodded as I looked around. "Yeah, I guess not." Then I looked back at her. "You know, for a bit there, I was starting to think you were the monster-eating people out here." Wendy pointed at herself, then laughed. "Wait, me? Wendy the Wendigo? Don't you think that's a little too on the nose?" I couldn't help it. As weird and messed up as everything was, as disturbing as everything I learned was, this was the Wendy I knew and cared for. So, I laughed with her. "Yeah, maybe so." Long story short, we're still together. Sure, my girlfriend might be a 7-foot-tall monster that eats other monsters for fun, but everyone has their quirks. Besides, dating is hard. My buddies and I went camping in a remote forest. We found a child wandering in the dark. I'm in a crappy band with some old high school buddies. A few weeks ago, our bassist, Pierce, informed the rest of the band that his parents had flown to Europe and left their house for us in Fort Collins. His dad is a sound engineer and has a recording studio in the house. We were ecstatic, so we packed light and made the drive from California to Fort Collins, ready to track a backlog of 8 songs we'd been sitting on. It was mid-spring, and the mountains looked like they were jutting from oceans of blue and yellow wildflowers. The drive was long, but it was nothing short of spectacular. In fact, it was so beautiful that one night after a recording session, Pierce suggested we go camping. I laughed at the idea. They all knew I'd had a somewhat negative experience in the Colorado Rockies a few years ago, but Ronnie and Jeff jumped on board and insisted I not be a wet blanket about it. Pierce recommended some vanilla tent camping at the foot of the mountain, but Ronnie had a bright idea. He wanted to do some astrophotography, and for that, he said, "We need to go to a place that's really dark." So he spent some time Googling and discovered Comanche Peak Wilderness, a remote section of a popular national park. "What a great idea," I remember chirping. "Why, surely nothing could go wrong." Of course, shit did go wrong, and it started on the drive up there. People always forget that evening begins at around 3 p.m. in the deep woods. As soon as the sun dips behind the treetops, the gloom sets in and things get eerie. Nothing makes me more claustrophobic than the sight of that heavy murk sliding over the world. My body rejects it because my brain knows it's too early for dark. I was on edge the second the paved road gave way to dirt. The other thing people forget is just how loud the woods are at times and how silent they become at others. The contrast between them can make your head spin. One moment it's a symphony of owls and crickets and toads. Then a branch will snap or thunder will crack, and suddenly you're wondering if you've gone deaf. And then, of course, if you think about it too much, you realize just how full the darkness is with all those watchful eyes. We went in as deep as we could. We ditched Pierce's truck on the side of some forgotten road and hiked about a half-mile into the trees. There was no trail. We followed the GPS to a tiny lake nestled somewhere uphill, where Ronnie could set up his cameras and get a clear view of the sky. We hadn't crossed a solitary soul after entering the preserve a few hours prior, and I felt apprehensive about the fact that no one knew where we were. By dusk, we'd set up the 2 tents Pierce had borrowed from his parents. We made a small bonfire pit between them and strung all our food up in the trees like you're supposed to. Ronnie set up his cameras along the shore, and then we waited for nightfall. My anxiety worsened as darkness ate away at the sky. The guys didn't notice. They drank and smoked and carried on. And right when the world went black, leaves began to crunch in the distance behind our tents. A girl emerged from the tree line and stopped at the edge of our little clearing. This girl was probably 8 years old and wore a white dressing gown, like she'd just woken up. She had platinum blonde, almost white hair, and skin so pale she looked like a ghost in the firelight. She wasn't carrying a flashlight or anything. She'd been walking in pitch-black woods. She squinted at our fire as if it annoyed her and let out a few wet coughs. We all just stared at each other in confusion while she studied us. There were no roads or trails in this area. This was not a campground. Her presence made no sense. Jeff eventually called out to her asking if she was okay, and she replied, "My mom's sick. Can you guys come help us?" Where is she?" Jeff asked. The girl just pointed into the forest. The trees and shadows and mist clustered together to form a great big wall of nope. I gave Jeff a subtle, fuck no headshake. I might be a coward, but I'm not about to get kidnapped by some malevolent wood pixie. Ronnie stood up and asked the girl if they were camping or if they had a house or what. The girl just said, "She's really sick. Just follow me." She started coughing again. At this point, all 4 of us could sense that something was wrong. Pierce, probably the cleverest of us, invited the girl to come warm up by the fire and explain what was going on. I think he knew she'd decline. The girl just turned and walked back into the woods, coughing as she went. Before she vanished, she turned around and said something, but we couldn't be certain of what. I heard, "So you'll be a liar," but Ronnie heard, "Soon you'll meet the liar." We built the fire up a lot more, mostly to keep a good perimeter against the darkness. All of us were creeped out, but after a few hours the guys had mostly forgotten about the girl. They laughed and told stories about drunken escapades. At some point, Jeff and I went to the tree line to take a piss. I walked about 10 steps into the woods and blasted the dark with my flashlight, Jeff following closely behind. I wanted to see if there was a clearing on the other side, or a footpath the girl might have followed. But there was nothing, just a snarl of impassable trees. We heard Ronnie shouting something, so we jogged back to the fire and saw him examining the southern edge of the clearing. That was the direction we'd left the truck in. Pierce said as we passed by, "He thinks he heard more footsteps." I heard them too. Standing next to Ronnie, I could make out a new pair of feet trampling the leaves in the dark. It was louder than the girl had been, probably bigger. "Show yourself," Ronnie shouted again. "We are armed." To my surprise, a woman answered him. She laughed and said, "Don't shoot! I'm just a hiker." We moved back and watched her step into the clearing. She was probably in her late 30s and wore a raggedy hat and an old, beat-up pack. I remember hearing Pierce grumble something like, "Real private spot you found here, Ronnie," and I agreed. How the fuck were all these people bumping into us way out here? The woman introduced herself as Sarah and apologized for scaring us. Ronnie demanded to know what she was doing out here, and she explained that she'd done the full-day loop around the mountain but got lost for a while. She claimed to have found her bearings and now knew where she was going. "You know the way back," he repeated to her. "Yep." In the dark, without a flashlight. Uh-huh. I know this area pretty well. Ronnie wasn't buying a word of it. He turned back to the rest of us and said, "We're getting cased, you guys. We're about to get robbed, soon as we fall asleep. Campers get killed by thieves and meth heads all the time." "Well, thanks for bringing us out here, dingus," Jeff said. Sarah laughed again. She was real smiley for a woman lost in the woods, in the dark. "I swear it's nothing like that," she said. "Look, I'll be on my way." For whatever reason, I felt the urge to press her further, so I said, "You know, you're not the only person we've met out here who's walking around without a light." That fake little smile fell off Sarah's face, and it took the wind right out of my sails. She stared at me like she could see down into the deepest places inside me. "You met the little girl?" she asked with a blank expression. My bandmates all exchanged looks of incredulity. Sarah collected herself, and a new smile spread across her face. She said, "Don't listen to anything that little brat says. She's a liar through and through. Look, why don't you guys hike down to the ranger station with me? It'll be safer together." She pointed behind herself, into the woods. Something lit up in my brain. This was the second time a stranger had tried to coax us into the dark. We weren't going to get robbed. Something much worse was about to happen. Pierce seemed to have come to the same conclusion, and he invited Sarah to instead join us around the fire. As he did with the little girl, he knew Sarah would decline. The strange woman told us she had to get back before it got any colder, and with that, she turned and hurried into the woods. After a long debate about what to do, we decided that hiking back to the truck was the fastest way to get lost or killed. We hadn't used a trail, and our phone batteries were low. Every time the wind blew, it set 1,000 trees groaning and shivering, which made it impossible to orient ourselves by sound. And it was so black that if I stared into the darkness long enough, I started having minor hallucinations as my brain tried to make sense of the void. So we kept the fire blazing and agreed to sleep in two-person shifts. Since Pierce and I were the soberest of the bunch, we agreed to stay up first. But only an hour into our watch, we started hearing the coughs and sputters of a little girl in the distance. I followed Pierce to the lake's edge, which lay about 30 yards from our camp. There, we heard an eerie voice wafting on the breeze. I saw the silhouette of a person milling about near the water a few hundred feet away and realized it was the girl. She was wandering around in the dark, singing. We booked it back to the fire and woke up Jeff and Ronnie, alerting them to the girl's presence. But as we discussed what to do, another voice erupted from nearby and began singing as well. It sounded just like Sarah. Pierce and I jumped into the tent with the other guys and sealed it up, terrified that the time had come for whatever these creeps had planned. But no one approached our camp. The two people just walked in slow half circles behind the trees, singing together in a language I couldn't identify. Ronnie always keeps a menacing-looking trail knife on him when we go hiking, and he scrambled for it while shouting that he'd butcher anybody who came near us. His yelling caused the people outside to go quiet for a few moments. I pulled out my phone to record some of the voices, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely operate it. I caught a bit of the girl, but then something even weirder happened. None of us are certain of how many people were in those woods, but we heard a third voice at that moment. It was deeper and guttural, like the sound of some night predator stalking around in a jungle. I'm not certain the noise was made by a person. Ronnie and Jeff believe the sound is coming from the girl, who has a coughing fit and then begins channeling some demonic voice. Pierce and I think it's a third person or an animal that was with them, waiting for us to leave the safety of the bonfire. Here is a link to the recording. Sorry for the poor quality. I have a crappy phone. After the commotion, the activity in the woods died down for a while. The guys and I remained inside the tent, terrified, only leaving its shelter to throw more wood on the fire about once an hour. None of us slept. And for the rest of the night, we occasionally heard distant singing, laughing, coughing, and the occasional whisper. Sometimes the girl would say, "Can you help us?" in the exact same tone, as if her voice had been recorded and replayed over and over. We also heard someone, probably Sarah, climbing a nearby tree and shouting things like, "I see you, boys," and "Let's go together. It's safe now." And that was it. By dawn, we were exhausted from terror and half frozen in the tent. The noises stopped, and the people, if they were people at all, had long abandoned their efforts to lure us into the dark. We packed up and hiked back to the truck, which had thankfully not been ransacked. As far as I'm concerned, the next time I go camping, it'll be in a treeless desert in Arizona, and I'll see if I can get Ronnie to post some of those night sky shots. I went camping with my friends, and a stranger joined our group unnoticed. I was the first to notice an extra person had joined our group. I counted 6 of us sitting around the campfire, but I knew we had left home with 5. The 6th person had joined us somewhere along the way, but where and when exactly I could not be sure. All the glowing faces looked familiar, like I had known them all for a lifetime. That was why it took so long to find the man out of place. I had to go through the faces one by one. I went through my history with them, recounting how I met them, how I knew them. I fit each one into my memories like puzzle pieces. First, there was Mark. He was sitting next to Sarah, chatting her up as always. I met Mark and Sarah 6 years ago in the 10th grade. Mark and I played wide receiver together on the school football team. Sarah was a cheerleader, and Mark always had a thing for her. The 3 of us started hanging out after games, Mark flirting nonstop, and Sarah always hilariously rebuking him after a while. Then there was Ben. We had been best friends since the 1st grade, inseparable ever since we bumped heads playing tag during recess. He had his arm around his longtime girlfriend, Justine. She started at our school when she moved from Chicago in the 7th grade. Ben sat next to her in English, and soon she became a part of our group at the time. She was quiet and shy when she first arrived, but once we got to know her, she opened up. She was one of the coolest and nicest people you could ever get to meet. She had also become close with Sarah in the past few years, and then there was the 6th face, the piece that did not fit. I stared at him, and his name escaped me. That is, if I ever had it in my memory banks in the first place. He looked familiar, but I could not place him in my memories. But why, if I recognized him, could I not remember his name? Why did he sit among us, acting as if he belonged? He stared at Mark and Sarah as they chatted. He laughed when they laughed, smiled when they smiled. I couldn't figure it out. The question burned in my head. How had he, a stranger, join our little group without any of us noticing something amiss? "Yo, Porter," Ben pulled me from my thoughts. "Your head up in the clouds or something?" I was just telling Justine about our 5th grade teacher. What was his name again? "Mr. Smith," I said. "Oh yeah, Mr. Smith. I was telling Justine how you could rile that guy up like nobody else. Remember that time you handed in an assignment printed in yellow ink?" Ben and Justine laughed. "Yeah, I remember," I said. "I can still see the steam coming out of his ears." They laughed again, and I joined in half-heartedly. When I glanced the strange man's way, he was watching us, grinning. He was always watching, always on the periphery, never partaking. Part of the reason he had flown under the radar. I was struck with the sense that he was studying us. My skin crawled. Ben drained his beer and threw the empty can in the cooler. "Well, I gotta take a leak," he said, and walked into the woods, swallowed up by the dark. "You really know how to push people's buttons when you want to, huh?" Justine said. I shrugged. I was having trouble focusing on the conversation. The weight of the situation, the reality of it, was starting to hit me. A strange man had attached himself to our group unnoticed, and who the fuck knew what his motivations were? Questions raced through my mind. None I could answer. How had no one else noticed yet? Why had it taken me so long to notice? Was I going insane? Did I have amnesia and forget this one friend of ours? What in the hell was going on here? The strange man stood with jerkiness. "I gotta take a leak," he said. It was the first time I heard him talk. He spoke with an odd lisp. It sounded as if he had to force the words from his throat. He walked with an awkward gait, and like Ben, disappeared behind the dark veil of the trees. No one else flinched. Justine kept talking. "I always loved the long relationship you and Ben have. It was so hard moving cities and leaving all my old friends behind. I mean, I can't complain too much. I wouldn't have met Ben and all you guys otherwise." "Justine, don't you see what's going on here?" "Huh? You're telling me you haven't noticed?" "Noticed what, Porter? What are you talking about?" she asked. "Who was that guy?" I gestured to the vacated spot the strange man left behind. "Oh, him. He's, She trailed off. She frowned into the fire. I could see her mind ticking over, and her eyes twinged with concern. I knew I wasn't going crazy. "I don't know," she said. "Who is it?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." We stared at each other. "Maybe—" Justine was cut off. An ear-piercing screech came from the woods. It sounded like a shrill, injured cat. A large cat. The sound split the air and cut our conversation short. A blanket of silence fell over the four of us. Only the crackling campfire persisted. The woods were still and quiet. "The fuck was that?" Mark broke the silence. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I've never quite heard an animal like that before." "Sounded like some fucked up mountain lion," Justine said. "You ever heard anything like that before, Porter?" I shook my head. My fingers tingled with adrenaline. Ben was still in the woods, and the strange man was out there with him. Dread filled my gut. "There's no mountain lions out here," Mark said. "It's probably an elk. They can make some creepy sounds." Sarah agreed. Justine bit her lip and scanned the woods. "It's probably okay." "I think Mark's right," I said to her, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Mark and Sarah had started up their conversation again when the strange man bumbled out of the woods. They paid him no mind. I was hoping something would have triggered in them by now, but they were oblivious. The strange man took a beer from the cooler. He fumbled with it, struggling with the tab. It was as if had never opened a can before. When he finally had it open, he sat, beer in hand, and continued to watch Mark and Sarah, a thin smile on his face. He never did take a sip. I watched him from across the campfire, his head wavering behind the heat. I touched on what made me uneasy about this strange man, aside from the fact he had managed to infiltrate our group without any of us noticing for a long time. He moved with jerkiness and awkwardness, like a newborn animal. Nothing he did was smooth or well-practiced. It made everything he did look like an act, an imitation. I didn't make the connection at the time, but I should have seen this man was not quite human. But at the moment I wasn't sure what to think. I guess I just thought he was a freak. I considered calling him out, then and there. I wanted to ask him just what the fuck he was doing. But I'll admit I was scared. I had visions of this guy being some horrific serial killer, and I didn't know how dangerous he was, or if he was armed. I didn't want to push him into doing something drastic that got us all killed. As time went by without any sign of Ben, I became convinced the strange man had done something to him. I watched him plotting, planning, and marking his next target. Anger sprouted from my fear, and I started to see red. I needed to stop him. We used an axe to chop firewood for our campfire, and it was leaning against my seat. This man was dangerous. I was sure of it. I convinced myself I needed to do something before another one of us was next. I clutched at the axe's handle. The smooth wood felt reassuring in my hand. Justine touched my arm. "Porter, where's Ben?" "I'm getting nervous." "It's okay," I lied, patting her hand. I'm sure everything is okay. I stood with axe in hand. I'm going to get some more firewood, I announced more awkwardly than I hoped. Okay, dude, Mark said. Porter? Justine's voice wavered. Speaking up was a mistake. I had drawn the attention of the strange man. I walked past him, trying to act as nonchalant as possible, but I was never a good actor. He watched me the whole way. He maintained his glare as I reached the perimeter of the woods, and as he looked back, his head rotated around an unnatural distance. That was enough to chill my spine. I was hoping he would turn around, to look away and give me an opening. But he never did. I'm not exactly sure what happened next. I never saw him stand up and walk over to me. I never even saw him move a single muscle, but in an instant he was standing in front of me, inches away from my face. It was as if he teleported. A metallic smell stung my nose. The strange man stunk of blood and copper. The axe trembled in my hand. Any thought of actually using it fled my mind. I locked into place, my skin covered in goosebumps. Power radiated off him. He spoke to me. "Get some firewood," he said in his forced tone, and he smiled wide. At that moment, Ben emerged from the woods. "Ben!" Justine cried. "Jesus," Ben said as Justine squeezed him. "Did you guys hear that cat thing?" "We think it was an elk," Mark said. "Where were you?" "Why did you take so long?" Justine asked. "I guess I wandered too far off and I lost sight of the campfire. Took me a bit to find my way back. For a second, I thought I was going to have to freeze my ass off out there alone tonight." The relief washed over my body like a wave, crashing into my muscles. I felt each one relax. At least Ben was safe. I looked for the strange man, but he was gone. He somehow slinked away while I was distracted. He was good at going undetected when he wanted to. My thoughts turned to getting out of there. Even though Ben was unharmed, that guy was still trouble. I started back towards the group and caught the middle of their conversation. "I don't know, actually." "Yeah, who was that guy?" Ben said. "I thought he was with you guys," Sarah said. "Yeah, isn't he your friend?" Mark added. "I thought he drove over with you three." "No," Ben said. "I don't know who he is." The panic spread over everyone's faces. They were finally feeling what I was feeling. The realization had set in. "We need to get out of here," I said, "before he comes back." "Yes, please," Justine said. "We have to leave now. That guy was a freak. Right, Porter?" "Yeah," I said. I explained to them how I noticed he was the odd man out when we were sitting around the fire. I explained the odd behavior, and they all agreed the guy was strange and possibly dangerous. None of us could pinpoint exactly when he had joined the group. He had slipped in unnoticed and unaccounted for. It was uncanny. We packed our tents in record time. We trekked the 15 minutes to our cars through dark woods, flashlights in hand. We heard the screech of the elk again. If it was an elk, which I have my doubts about now, and we took some comfort from the fact it sounded farther away. Even so, we picked up our pace for the final stretch of the walk. I felt like I could finally relax behind the wheel and locked doors of my SUV. Justine and Ben sat in the back, while Mark and Sarah followed behind in Mark's beaten-up Ford Laser. We were heading out of the woodland and were planning to shack up in a motel for the night before heading home in the morning. I thought we were free and clear. We wound our way around the dark roads that snaked through woods. I let a smile open up my face when we finally reached the exit road. It was an arrow-straight stretch of asphalt that split through the last few miles of woodland. I pressed on the accelerator. I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there, and I think Mark was feeling the same way because he sat close on my rear bumper. I remember thinking, at least we'll have a strange tale to tell after all this. I didn't think it was about to turn into a horror story. The trees and the dashed lines on the road blurred past us. My headlights reached out for the seemingly endless road, and my speedometer needled its way towards 100 miles per hour. I don't know what possessed me to go that fast, and I wish Mark didn't follow my lead. It was a mistake. The strange man appeared from behind a tree. He walked into the middle of my lane. I slammed the brakes. It was too late. The next sequence of events happened so fast it plays like a slideshow in my mind. The tires screeched, and there was a smell of burning rubber. The strange man folded over my bonnet and got sent flying down the road. He skated across the pavement on his back, moving with such speed it looked as if he was gliding on ice. More tire screeching. Mark flew past in the opposite lane, fishtailing. He fought it, and for a moment I thought he had it saved. But the car hooked right into the trees. The sickening sound of crunching metal reverberated in the air. Mark's car slammed into a tree, driver's side first, sending fragments of glass and metal flying. The car bounded off one tree and into another. The front passenger side impacted this time. The front light exploded, and the passenger side cavity caved in, sending a wheel bounding into the woods. The crumpled heap of a car came to a rest. Justine was the first out the door, crying out Sarah's name. Ben went after her, and I followed after him. Everything felt surreal as shock coursed through my body. It was as if I was watching through a screen. I floated over the asphalt as Justine and Ben sprinted towards the steaming wreckage. The crash scene dimly lit by my SUV's one remaining headlight. There are two screams I'll never forget. They imprinted themselves on my brain, and I'll hear their echoes at night forever. If I happen to get Alzheimer's later in life, I know the last thing to go will be these screams. The first one I heard when I was 13. It came from my mother. It flooded the house, splashing off the walls. I ran out of my room to see her crumpled at the front door, with two police officers standing by. They had notified her that her eldest son, my brother, had died. The second came from Justine when she saw what was waiting for us in that Ford Laser. Mark was unrecognizable. He was a shattered mess of bone, skin, and blood melded and intertwined with the crumpled steel. Sarah was blinking slowly, her breathing labored. Her one arm shattered, broken in too many places to count. Her legs crushed at knees from the front of the car, which crumpled back into her leg space. Her legs would have been flat if I could see them. Justine turned away and fell to her knees, face buried in her hands, shoulders heaving. Ben tried to comfort her, but he had to turn away and throw up off the side of the road. I pulled out my phone and struggled to dial 911. With my fingers shaking, I kept pressing the wrong numbers. My voice was small and distant as I explained what happened to the operator. She told me to stay on the line, but as I looked down the road, I dropped my phone. The strange man was standing there. His grin reached from ear to ear, showing a grandstand of teeth. His shoulders shrugged up and down as if he was laughing. In fact, the fucker was laughing. If I were not in shock, I would have gone after him right then and there. I would have torn his heart, if he has one, right from its chest. But all I could do was stare, mouth agape, struggling to keep the tears behind my eyes. The strange man started for the woods. I watched him go, and I watched him change. I saw it. I know I did. This was no illusion. No trick of the mind. This was real. I saw him shapeshift. I saw its true form. We were not dealing with something human that night. After countless hours of research, I believe I saw what others have called the goatman. Its horns stuck out unevenly from its head. Its grinning snout bared rows of sharp teeth, and walking upright like a man with an awkward gait, it vanished into the shrouded woods. It has been 8 months since that night. I've only seen my friends a handful of times since then. Our relationships have shattered and are left in ruin. All we are now to each other is a stark reminder of that night. Mark is dead. Sarah survived, but as a triple amputee. Justine and Ben broke up. And here I am, rugged with a scraggly beard and uncut hair after spending every sleepless night researching the monstrosity I saw that night. The Goat Man. I'm going back to those woods. So help me God, I'm going back. I'm coming for the Goat Man, and I'm not stopping until one of us is dead. I thought camping in an RV was supposed to be safe. Have you ever had one of your favorite activities completely ruined for you, maybe forever, due to a negative memory associated with it? I do. I don't think I'll ever be able to sleep outside of anything that remotely resembles a house again after one night in late June of 2019. My boyfriend, Tim, and I had been together for about 2.5 years and actually met due to some mutual friends who, like both of us, loved being outdoors. Hiking, biking, kayaking, camping, you name it. We'd do it and probably have done it. Now, we're not really adverse to getting dirty or smelling horribly after spending days in the wilderness, but I would say that we try to avoid it if at all possible. For that reason, we decided, soon after moving in together, to buy a decent-sized RV trailer. He already drove a truck, very useful for carrying outdoor gear or accessing remote-ish trails, so we invested a solid chunk of change in a 20-foot trailer. It was surprisingly pretty nice. I won't say it was the Ritz-Carlton of the camping trailer world, but it was better than sleeping on the ground with bugs and dirt and who knows what else. The back of it had a bathroom with a toilet, shower, and window. The middle had a kitchen and couch that folded into a bed, and the front had another bed. No frills, but it got the job done. Because of the size of RV beds, we typically would use both beds if it was just the two of us, but we could squeeze into front bed together if necessary, or if we were in the mood. Starting in the spring of 2019, we took this thing all over the western half of the US. We both had jobs that allowed us to work remotely, doing this, before it was cool. So we had some pretty epic road trips for those first few months. Around Memorial Day, we wrapped up our trip and came home for a while, though had plans to head to my parents' house for the 4th of July. We lived on the West Coast, they lived back in the Midwest, so it'd entail a couple of days of driving. Rather than just driving as fast as we could, we decided to bring the trailer and made a week out of it, leaving near the end of June, with plans to see the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, Petrified Forest, and a whole slew of other stops along the way. On our 4th day of the trip, after we'd done most of our sightseeing, we pulled over at an RV park somewhere east of Albuquerque. Now, I would like to apologize to any New Mexico residents that may read this, but we weren't exactly getting the best vibes from the state thus far. Most of the people had been friendly, but there were like 100 too many stop driving drunk signs for our liking, so we weren't exactly eager to stay if possible. Our accommodations for the night were on the outskirts of a small town, the kind where the streets were all numbered, and one main avenue through town had the gas station, general store, and church on it. If you've ever traveled the US, no matter what part of the country you're in, you've been through hundreds of these. We rolled in as the sun was beginning to waver and drop below the brown, dusty, mountainous peaks in the distance, creating a hazy light at dusk. We'd been able to establish a good routine. I got the steps and awning on the trailer set up, while Tim emptied the gray and black water tanks for, lack of a better term, our used shower water and poo, respectively, and replenished the clear water tanks. The campground was set up in a couple of large circles, mostly empty. There was a couple of large 40-plus-foot RVs set up on another side, and a few older couples at a fire pit in front of one of them, probably some people enjoying retirement, and a few other camping spots taken by vehicles or camps of varying sizes and elaborateness. The left side of our trailer was parallel to some thick brush and trees, so the right side, the one with the door, opened into the rest of the park. As I stood facing the RV, with all 5 feet 4 inches of me trying to reach and pull the awning down, I heard a hum of a motor approaching behind me. I turned to see a man on a quad bike approaching. Probably just some guy wheeling around because he's bored, I thought. I resumed work at the awning. I heard a shout behind me over the whine of the engine. "Need a hand?" I glanced over my shoulder and gave a half smile. "No thanks, I got it." The man got off the bike anyway. He stood on the opposite end of the awning from me, reached up and pulled, extending the cover over the porch of the trailer. "Oh, thanks," I said sheepishly. He nodded. I eyed his clothing. He had a blue polo shirt, khaki shorts, and a black baseball cap on, with some sort of logo on it. He also had a belt with what appeared to be a gun. His eyes were sort of small and beady and darted quickly around. There was a brief moment of silence as we gave each other a once-over. He squinted his eyes. "I'm Marco, I work security here," he said suddenly. "Oh, well, thanks," I replied, awkwardly. This guy was definitely making my spidey senses tingle, not in a good way, but I couldn't really figure out why. He just sort of walked away without saying anything else, hopped back on the bike and left, looking back over his shoulder and locking eyes with me for a few seconds before he left. I stood there for a minute, pondering. He's probably just kind of a socially awkward, weird dude, I reassured myself, mentally, going back to finishing up the task at hand. I felt an arm reach around my waist and grab. I jumped, letting out a sharp yelp. "Sorry," I heard Tim's voice behind me. I sighed, spun around and smiled, rolling my eyes at him. "A little jumpy tonight, aren't we?" He laughed, kissing me. I playfully slapped his shoulder. "Come on, let's get some dinner started," I said, opening the door to the trailer. As we ate a delicious, nutritious meal of hot dogs, Easy Mac, and pickles, don't ask, I told him about my newfound friend, Marco. "He doesn't sound weird to me," Tim said with a mouthful of hot dog. I raised my eyebrows and laughed. "Run that by me again?" I giggled. He swallowed, wiping his mouth. "I mean, what's so weird about him? He stared at you?" "I don't know, I just got the wrong vibe from him. And besides, how many RV parks have we ever stayed in that have security?" He laughed. "That would be none, but to be fair, we've been saying the whole time how weird of a state this is. Besides, I doubt the owners would let some creep run around pretending to be security." He had a point. We cleaned up from dinner, got ready for bed, and were soon out cold in our separate bunks, the only light coming from the moonlight outside that lit up the gravel parking lot. Tim took the front bunk. I took the rear bunk, which was right behind the door. I awoke to the sound of the engine, the same one I heard earlier when putting the awning up. I rolled over and looked at the display of the clock on the microwave. 1:48 a.m. Ugh, I just wanted to sleep, and ATV McGee out there was on patrol. "I'm sure it's completely necessary for you to be doing that right now," I thought facetiously. I shut my eyes, but the engine persisted, coming closer and closer to our trailer. Then suddenly it shut off. Silence. Finally, I get back to sleep. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. There was a tapping at the window literally right next to my bed. If I rolled over, my face would be a few inches from the glass. I could hear a faint, low male voice from outside of the window. "You need to come outside right now." He kept repeating it, too. I rolled onto my back, slowly, and peeked out of the corner of the blinds. "You have to come outside." It was tough to see in the darkness, but the silhouette told me enough. It was definitely Marco, that weird security guard from before. My suspicions went from a slight weird vibe to, "I'm about to call the cops on this guy," in the span of 2 seconds. "Bring your husband." 2. "It's urgent." "What?" I got closer to the glass. He repeated it again. "You and your husband come out, quietly, now." Before, I was convinced that this guy was some sort of rapist or something. Now I wasn't sure. He either wanted to murder both of us, or he legitimately needed us for some unfathomable reason. I still have no idea why. Maybe it was that aforementioned impeccable intuition. But I slowly stood up and crept towards the door, glancing over at Tim. He was both fast asleep and probably nude. I decided that if Marco had truly evil intentions, I could scream loud enough to wake Tim, and probably anyone in a half-mile radius, so I left him sleeping peacefully. I silently opened the door and poked my head out. Marco stood crouched near my window and turned his head towards me. "There's someone in the trailer," Marco said bluntly in a quiet voice. "What?" I whispered. "Yeah, my boyfriend is asleep in there." I had no idea what this guy was talking about. "No, there's someone else in there," he hissed urgently. In my half-asleep stupor, I still had no idea what was going on. I stepped down out of the trailer, rubbing my eye, and let the door slam behind me, causing a loud bang. Marco winced and rushed over to the door. I heard a thudding in the back of the trailer, then a shout from within. Marco rushed in, pulling the gun from his hip. I was close behind. A man was standing on the bed that I'd just been sleeping on. He was short, with dark features, a torn pair of pants, and plain black t-shirt. He had long, scraggly hair. His right arm was outstretched, holding a long knife, but he wasn't really pointing it, he just sort of held it. It was pointed sideways, with the bottom of the blade facing the ceiling. That was creepy enough, but as we stepped into the trailer, he looked our way. He opened and closed his mouth a couple of times before letting out the most bizarre scream I've ever heard. It wasn't high-pitched. It was almost like if Kurt Cobain's drawn-out screaming in Aneurysm was done by a guy that may be a serial killer and was currently threatening my boyfriend. "Oh shit," My boyfriend. I hadn't even looked at him, though it had only been a couple of seconds. He had pulled the blanket up to cover most of him and was holding a pan, which he must have grabbed off of the shelf next to his bed. Marco held up his gun, and the man took off, running to the back of the trailer, still screaming. The way he ran almost reminded me of an animal. He sort of trotted one leg at a time, leaning forward as he did, but with way more speed than you would expect. The door to the bathroom was opened, which must have been where he had hid. He proceeded through it, and in one fluid action, hopped from the seat of the toilet to the tank, then out the back window, landing somewhere in the bushes below. Marco ran out the door, chasing him around into the woods behind the trailer. I stood in the trailer, in a state of shock, as Tim sat up, in a similar wide-eyed state. I sat on the bed slowly next to him. We were silent for what felt like forever. He exhaled loudly. "Yeah," I said. "I know what you mean." He smiled slowly. The rest of the night was a blur. The police came and took statements from most of the people staying at the park. The owner didn't sleep there at night. He arrived and apologized profusely, refunding our fee for the night. Marco had chased the guy for a few minutes on foot, but lost him somewhere in the thicket. As far as I know, they never caught the guy, and they had never heard of any incidents similar to ours to where this guy may have been a, to put it lightly, repeat offender. Before we left, I asked Marco how he knew the guy was in our trailer. He explained that he typically patrolled on foot and saw someone in the distance near the bushes, so he got onto his bike and made his way over to us. Around that time, he saw the guy climb into the bathroom window from the outside. That's when he woke me up at the window, trying to do so discreetly to not alert the creep that anyone knew he was in there. Both Tim and I thanked him repeatedly, but he insisted that it was just his job. The two of us were eager to get out of there, even having only slept for a couple of hours. We drove straight through to my parents' house, taking turns sleeping in the back seat of the truck while the other drove. Our perfect road trip had lost its luster, and we were ready to rid ourselves of any traces of it. Once we had arrived, before even going to my parents' house, the first thing we did was go to sell this trailer. Neither of us had any desire to keep the thing after what had happened, and frankly, I didn't think I would be camping again for a very, very long time. We pulled into the RV dealer and were able to quickly get a salesperson to talk to. After making up some reasons for wanting to sell it, something about needing the money for an addition on our house, I think, we were a few signatures away from the trailer and hopefully the associated experiences no longer being in our possession. "Now, if you can just get me the title for the trailer, that will be all that we need," the salesman said. "I'll go get it while you sign these," I said to Tim. "In the glove box of the truck, right?" He affirmed. I left the office and opened the passenger door to the truck, leaning on the seat as I popped the glove box open. It was kind of a mess, which was odd, because Tim usually kept it very organized. I rifled around it and found the document that I was looking for. As I pulled it out, a square of paper fell out and landed face down on the floor mat. I picked it up and turned it over, then my jaw dropped. It was a Polaroid photo, dated the night it had happened, taken of me asleep in bed. I don't go camping anymore. Let me preface this by saying that I realize that camping alone in the middle of nowhere isn't the smartest activity a person can engage in. I've lost count of the times that well-meaning busybodies have lectured me about it. But frankly, I just don't care. You see, all of my life I've done things that I don't particularly want to do. I went to school, I got a job, I pay my bills. Camping, the stillness and the solitude of the forest at night, gives me joy, and joy seems in short supply most days. I never felt afraid in the woods, no matter how remote. I only ever felt calm, peaceful, like I was doing what I was always meant to do. That doesn't mean that I never took precautions. There are 3 things that a solitary woman needs in the woods: a good first aid kit, a good compass, and a good dog. I always went out with all 3, and I always thought that those things could keep me from whatever might be out there in the forest. I was wrong, of course, but just because I only ever considered the living threats. The last camping trip I'll ever take started out normally. I had planned a 3-night loop through a stretch of woods I'd never been to before. Due to the unfamiliar and remote terrain, and the fact that I wouldn't be following an established trail, I was only planning on hiking about 8 miles a day before setting up camp each evening. That way, I wouldn't ever be too exhausted to make good decisions, and could generally enjoy my new surroundings more thoroughly. I loaded up my pack with all the supplies I'd need, told my parents where I'd be and when I'd return, and headed out to a part of the state that was completely foreign to me. I arrived at the forest early in the day and parked alongside a deserted stretch of gravel road. I could see no sign that the road had been driven down in quite some time, and the thought of having this whole section of woods to myself filled me with a moment of glee. That moment intensified when I opened the passenger side of my car to let Susie out. Susie was the kind of dog that provoked endless speculation about her genetic line, but ultimately she was several different kinds of mutt all rolled into one. Though not particularly intimidating to look at, Susie was loyal and protective. I wouldn't go on a hike without her by my side, and she was never happier than when she was walking along with me. Susie gave me confidence that I could handle whatever the wilderness threw my way. With my pack loaded high and heavy on my back, Susie and I headed out into the woods. The route I had chosen was rugged and varied, and often I had to stop to check my map and compass. I had opted to walk along the ridgeline the first day, and found that the way was a gauntlet of loose rocks and fallen trees. There was no sign of humanity there, no empty bottles or trailblazes to pull me back into civilization. Despite the hard going, it was paradise. That evening, I set up camp at a clearing near one of the higher ridges. I turned in a bit earlier than I'd originally wanted, driven into my tent by the bite of the early fall air. Susie snuggled in next to me as I zipped myself into my sleeping bag. Before I knew it, I had been lulled into sleep by the chorus of chirping night insects around me. I woke up in the early morning hours to silence. A glance at my watch showed that it was 1:45, too early to be anything other than dead asleep. The full moon above illuminated the night, and I spent several seconds watching the shadows of the tree branches dance across the top of my tent. It was downright cold by then, and I zipped my sleeping bag more tightly. I looked at Susie, still laying next to my body. Her eyes were open and focused on something beyond the tent. The wind must have woken her too. I closed my eyes, hoping to fall quickly back to sleep, when I felt Susie growl against me. I murmured a reassurance. "It's probably just a deer, pup." Something, though, didn't feel right. Susie wasn't the type of dog to growl at passing animals. In fact, she lived her life as though other creatures were curiosities at best and distractions at worst. The only time I'd heard her growl like that was 2 years ago when a black bear came shuffling down a trail and caught us unawares. In a weird way, the thought of a bear outside the tent was a relief. My bag was hung from a tree, and bears in this part of the country weren't known to be aggressive. I stroked Susie's fur and waited for the animal to sniff around the campground, determined that we weren't that interesting, and leave. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the sound of Susie's growling, so low and constant that it could have been a purr. I waited for what seemed like hours, but never heard the animal outside. As the morning went on, Susie's growls turned to soft whimpers, and I let her crawl into my sleeping bag with me. The sleep that came was fitful and interrupted by strange nightmares, but the morning sunlight eventually made its way into the tent. You may be wondering at this point why I didn't turn around and walk right back out of the woods, to my car, and back to civilization. Well, the simple reason is that I wasn't worried. So, I thought, a bear came around the campsite. It wasn't that big of a deal, and besides, I'd be another 8 miles away by the time night came around again. I packed myself up, had a leisurely breakfast, and set out again. The morning's hike was uneventful and beautiful, though Susie stuck disconcertingly close by me, neglecting her usual explorations and mouth ajar with anxiety. Every time I tried to pet her, she stiffened, so I let her be and continued walking on. We stopped in a quiet clearing for late lunch, more than 6 miles into the day's hike. It wasn't until I was packing up to leave that I noticed it. The silence was total in this clearing. No birds, no cicadas, no rustle of leaves where squirrels leapt from tree to tree. It sent a chill down my spine, and I noticed Susie watching the woods ahead. "Let's get out of here, girl." She looked up at me and whined. When we arrived at the edge of the woods, I immediately saw why there were no bird songs. Their little feathered bodies lay on the forest floor, dotting the fallen leaves with reds, blues, whites, and yellows. I poked a bluebird with my hiking stick, turning it over, looking for signs of predation or illness. I saw nothing strange, other than the mere fact of the lifeless body itself. I expected to need to call Susie to me. Birds were a favorite snack, but she had backed up behind me, another low growl escaping her curled lips. I stepped back to her and clipped a leash to her collar, fearing that she might run, or that I might. The woods remained dead silent. My heart had frozen in my chest, clenched tightly but somehow beating forcefully at the same time. Something was very wrong, and I needed to get out of this forest. I stood where I was and tried to think. I was 14 miles from where I parked my car, if I went back the way I came. Given the terrain, I knew I wouldn't make it back before nightfall. I had in my pack a compass and map. I could try to map a new route, one that might take me back faster, but there was no guarantee that I could find my way before dark either. I was at the halfway point of the route, and I had to make the decision: keep going or turn back. I thought back to the campsite the night before. Something was out there. Maybe it was just a bear, but maybe it was something else. The thought of going back to that spot to sleep made me shudder. I knew that I needed to keep going. I'd get as many miles as I could during the rest of the daylight hours, get a few hours of sleep, and then finish tomorrow ahead of schedule. I just had to make it through another night, and I'd be back at my car. I steadied myself and forged ahead, Susie tense beside me, hackles raised. The miles melted behind us. There were no stops, no breaks to look at flowers or have a snack. Just the constant sound of my boots striking the ground to break the unnatural quiet. Birds littered the ground, and when I came to the next clearing, I had to step carefully through a mass of bodies where a flock of starlings was downed. As I walked, I kept an eye on the trees around me, but saw no movement, only that awful stillness. Slowly the light began to fade, its rays become orange and diffuse through the leaves. I knew that I had to stop, that I couldn't keep going through the night. The tent, though made of polyester and carbon fiber, would at least allow me the illusion of security. I found a clearing, mostly devoid of dead birds, and set up camp. Susie whimpered, "It's okay, girl. We'll be out of here tomorrow, I promise." I was in my tent before the sun finished its descent behind the trees, hand wrapped tightly around one of my hiking poles, and Susie next to me. Whatever was out here, I just hoped it would leave me alone. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the strain of the day overcoming me in waves before the nightmares pulled me back into the world. Susie didn't sleep at all as far as I could tell. She just lay there stiffly, every so often emitting another low growl and licking her lips nervously. When I was awake, I listened. The wind moved the branches above me, but nothing else made a sound. I mentally clung to the creaks and groans of the trees, something familiar and reassuring in this strange place. Eventually, though, that too became twisted and bizarre. The branches began to sway above me ferociously, casting shadow fingers across the top of my tent. The wind, however, sounded as if it were dying down. It was as if the branches were moving on their own. But of course, that couldn't be. I sat up in my sleeping bag, freeing my arms and drawing Susie in closer to me. The warmth of her little body and the feel of her breathing gave me comfort in the moments before we both heard it. A crunch of footfall right outside made Susie lunge for the tent door. Frantically, she began clawing at the fabric, whining and snapping her teeth. I tried to hold her still, but she was fighting me at every turn. When the fabric ripped, there was nothing I could do. She bolted into the night. I heard her yelp seconds later, and the silence returned. Before I could even process what had just happened, the tent began to shake. The tree branches, once just shadows upon the surface, now grasped and raked against my tent, tearing gashes along its seams. I fought my way out, still clutching the hiking pole, but hopelessly aware of how little good it did. I emerged into the little clearing of my campsite, my ruined tent illuminated by a full moon. The trees were motionless, just as they should be, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, The hairs on the back of my neck stood to attention, though the air was still. The only thing that I could hear was my own ragged breath and the quick percussion of blood through my ears. I backed slowly into the bark of the nearest tree, feeling totally exposed in the clearing. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, but the silence continued. Around me, the shadows morphed and writhed as the moon made its way across the sky. My eyes saw things that were not there, and the cold began to seep into my bones. I could think of nothing else to do standing alone and vulnerable in the night, so I started talking. At first to myself, and then to whatever was with me. Please. I'm sorry, I choked back giant ugly sobs. I didn't mean to disturb you. I didn't know. I'm leaving, I swear. Just one more day and I'll be gone. Please, please. Please became a mantra, a point of focus for my ever-unraveling mind. Instead of looking for forms in the shadows, I instead centered my thoughts around the word, how it felt in my mouth, and how it sounded hoarser and hoarser as the night went on. By the time the gray morning light began to seep through the trees, I was numb. I was numb from fear, from cold, from grief. I was unsure if I could find the strength in my legs to hike out of this place, but I did. I left my tent where it lay in tatters and started into the woods alone. The rest of the day barely registered with me, if I'm being completely honest. I remember the silence, the feeling of being watched, and pleas on my cracked lips. When I finally made it back to my car, I didn't even have the energy to cry. Sometime later, when I felt well enough to revisit my experience, I looked up the forest, this corner of nowhere, online. I read stories about the isolation and the wilderness of the forest, about logging crews who had abandoned their machinery, about how the trails had become overgrown and useless. I had seen these stories before my trip, and they excited me. The solitude of it all, the remote, rugged terrain that had driven the less adventurous away. But now I had context. I understood. The forest wasn't for me. It wasn't for any of us, and it made sure that it would always be that way. I'm posting this because my friend Lena asked me to, and because I think people need to hear it before they head out alone. She emailed me the night she got back. She sounded wired and exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She said I could share it as long as I kept her last name off it and didn't pin the exact location. I haven't heard from her since that night. I'm pasting the email below. I trimmed out some personal stuff, but I didn't change the story. From Lena to me. Subject: I think I almost got taken. I'm home. I've showered twice and I still smell smoke. I'm writing this before I can convince myself I overreacted, because I didn't. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I'm not being dramatic. I almost didn't make it back. You know my routine. 3 nights out, solo. I don't do dumb stuff. I leave my route with you and Dad. I pack extra water, a filter, med kit, headlamp with fresh batteries, backup light, knife. I've been to this forest before. It's always quiet. The old campground past the fire road is closed, but there are informal pads beyond it. Flat spots people use when the main loop is full. Shoulder season is the best time. Fewer drunk guys, fewer RVS. It was supposed to be boring. I wanted boring. Day 1. I left Thursday at noon. Got to the trailhead lot after 2. Empty except for a pickup with a dog crate in the bed and a Subaru with a cracked taillight. I signed the registry at the kiosk. Wind was light, high clouds, that dry cold that bites as soon as the sun drops. Hike in was easy. You remember the spur that cuts east from the decommissioned campground? It drops into a wide bowl and then back up to the ridge. I took that and camped a little short of the ridge because the basin holds cold. I've used the same flat spot twice before. Hard dirt, decent windbreak, just enough trees to string a tarp if it rains. Set up fast. Stove, food, bear hang. I sat on the log and listened to the creek down in the bowl. Nobody else around. No voices, no cars. Good quiet. Around 10, I killed the fire. I know you hate when I say I sleep like a rock out there, but usually I do. I didn't plan to check my phone, no service anyway, but I pulled it out for a second to use the clock. It still had battery. I put it away. I fell asleep with that happy brain haze you get after a day on trail. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. Not startled, just awake. It was dark the way it's only dark in real woods. At first, I thought I was hearing the creek. Then I realized the sound was wrong. It wasn't water. It was a low rhythm. Not a drum exactly. Metal on something? Tap, 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 tap. It came and went with the wind. Then a few voices, not loud, not arguing, just voices, like a conversation too far away to make out the words. I lay there and counted the seconds between sounds like an idiot counting to calm down. I told myself it was other campers using barrel fires. Could be night hunters on a private parcel outside the park. People do stupid things. I zipped the bag tighter and put my hat over my face and told myself to stop listening. It took a while, but I slept. Day 2. The woman. I made coffee at dawn, hands shaky, but I think that was caffeine cravings. Decided to make a long loop and check a side valley I haven't seen in a few years. I left the tent up, food bag hung high, stove in the bear can. I took my day pack with water, filter, first aid, knife, snacks. The sky was that dull blue that means cold all day. The forest looked normal until it didn't. Maybe an hour from camp I saw a little thing that didn't belong. A ring of stones in the duff with a spiral scratched into the dirt in the middle. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't almost stepped in it. The spiral wasn't a kid doodle. It was neat, finger-width lines, 3 turns, then a slash through the center. Probably nothing, but I clocked it. Farther on, I saw 2 small bones, bird maybe, tied with string and hanging from a low branch. They knocked together in the breeze and made a tiny clack. A little farther, a strip of aluminum can cut into a rectangle and hung from fishing line, flashing when the sun hit it. That could be a deer deterrent, I guess. Farmers do that. But this is parkland. The pieces felt arranged, not random. I told myself some group was doing a weird retreat. Hippies, whatever. People do drum circles out here all the time. Still, I decided to make a wider loop back toward the ridge. I didn't want to walk straight through someone's camp. I was picking my way over Blowdown when I saw her. Older woman, maybe late 50s, strong shoulders, forearms like she actually splits wood, sun-browned face, crow's feet you could see from 10 feet away. She wore a patchwork of gear, an old puffy under a canvas jacket, wool hat tucked into a hoodie, cargo pants, barefoot, which, Jesus. She had a stick in her right hand with a leather wrap around the grip and a notch at the top like she'd carved it. She was standing in the middle of the trail like she'd been waiting to be seen. "Morning," she said first. Calm voice. The kind of voice some teachers have when they want you to know they're in charge without raising it. "Hey," I said. I kept my tone friendly because you know me. Default to polite. Didn't think anyone else was out here this early. Her eyes did a quick scan. Not creepy exactly, but assessing. "You're camping close to the valley," she said, not a question. "Up on the ridge," I said, vague. "Couple nights." She smiled. It didn't hit her eyes. "The land's in recovery," she said. "You shouldn't sleep near it." "It's public land," I said before I could stop myself. I immediately wished I hadn't said it like that. "Everything alive is public until it isn't," she said. "You out here alone?" "No," I lied. "Meeting friends this afternoon." She looked at my day pack like she could see through the fabric to count what was in it. "Do you eat meat?" she asked. "What?" She tilted her head. "It ties you to what's dying," she said. "We're cutting that out." "Okay," I said, because what else do you say to that? "Well, I'll stay clear of your group." Her smile went flat. "If you hear the fires," she said, "don't look." "Why?" "People who look never leave." I tried to keep my face neutral. My stomach had that drop feeling you get when a car loses traction for a second. "Have a good day," I said to end it. I stepped past. She matched my step for 2 paces without quite turning her body. "Full moon's coming," she said. "We finish before then." I didn't reply. I walked. After 10 steps, I checked my back trail without moving my head. She was still standing there. She lifted 2 fingers from the stick like a lazy salute. I picked up my pace until the trees hit her. I know. I should have packed up right then. But it was midday, the trailhead was hours away, and I could rationalize anything with daylight. I headed back to my camp by a different route to avoid the valley she'd talked about. The woods felt wrong, like the quiet wasn't the nice kind anymore. I kept catching whiffs of smoke when the wind shifted, and it wasn't campfire smoke. It had that greasy tang like cooking fat or something else I don't want to identify. Night 2, the fires. I ate early. I didn't want to be cooking in the dark. I did the checklist twice. Headlamp, knife, whistle, phone, still battery, still no service. The sun went. The cold came in fast, and then the orange appeared between the trees downslope. More than one fire. A few lights moving around them. The same low rhythm as the night before. Metal on something, then voices. Not singing, talking, but in a cadence. I told myself to go to sleep. Curiosity wrestled with common sense and won by cheating. I took my headlamp off my head and put it in my jacket pocket so it wouldn't flash accidentally. I kept the little backup light in my hand for my own feet. I moved slow, picking places to put my boots so nothing snapped. The glow got stronger. I could feel the heat on my face before I saw the clearing. The wind shifted toward me and brought that heavy smell, fat and ash. I crouched behind a pine with a split trunk and leaned just enough to see. Tarps and tents ringed a packed dirt circle. Maybe a dozen people, maybe more, moving in and out of the firelight. Not robed, not theatrical. Dirty outdoor clothes, layers, hats, some in puffy jackets with duct-taped elbows, some shirtless because apparently they wanted to pretend it wasn't freezing. Faces streaked with black, grease on hands, a barrel to one side. Something boiled inside and popped every few seconds. One man brought a 5-gallon bucket from the shadows and handed it to another who poured it slowly into the fire. The flames flared, the smell sharpened and went sweet. I almost gagged. The older woman stood near the center. The stick was in her left hand now. She wasn't shouting or preaching. She gave quiet instructions like someone directing a work crew. "Not there," she said to one guy, shifting his stance with a touch to the elbow. "Hold steady," to another. She nodded to someone out of my view and then looked straight at me. I didn't move. She couldn't see me. The fire was bright. My spot was dark. Physics says she couldn't see me. But her face turned and her eyes locked the way someone's eyes lock when they find the thing they were already looking for. Her chin lifted a millimeter. She didn't say my name because she didn't know it, but it felt like a name. A man to her right raised his arm and pointed past the fire, somewhere in my direction. "Movement," he said. A flashlight beam circled clumsily and cut across trunks. It didn't hit me. It hit the tree next to me and blew the bark into sudden detail. I had one clear thought, leave, and my legs obeyed. I backed straight away from the beam, counting steps, feeling with my feet, then turned and walked as fast as I could without breaking into noise. After 5 trees, I ran. I reached my camp and went straight into the tent, zipped, and sat with my back against my pack and my knife in my hand. I stayed that way until the circle of dark inside the tent turned into gray and then into day. I never fell asleep. My hands shook like I'd had 6 coffees. I thought I heard voices twice, but that might have been the blood in my ears. Day 3. Signs. I should have left at dawn. I didn't. Tell Dad to say, "I told you so" if he wants. He'd be right. I told myself I couldn't make the trailhead before dark if I left without rest. I told myself I'd move camps to a spot closer to the road and go at first light. I broke the tent down and repitched 2 drainages over. It wasn't far enough. I see that now. At the time, my brain said, different spot equals safer. When I got back from hauling the last armful, something small sat on the table. A bundle of sticks tied with sinew. 3 sticks, 2 short, 1 long, bound into a crude triangle. Not a symbol you'd recognize from TV, just a kid's simple shape. It hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. The tarp line I'd just tied was sliced on one side. Clean cut, not frayed, not a branch rub. I retied it with a shorter reach and tucked the cut end in my pocket without thinking why. My water jug was gone. I found it 30 yards away, empty, sitting upright in the needles like it was on display. No note, no threats scrawled in charcoal, just the quiet message, Leave. I stared at my mess of a camp and felt like an idiot for still being there. I packed most of my stuff. I left the tent up so I had somewhere to sit without freezing. I kept the knife in my jacket. I tucked my phone into my waistband because pockets suddenly felt insecure. I didn't go far the rest of the day. I didn't want to come back and see someone standing in the tarp shade holding my pot like it was theirs. The woods were silent. No birds. Even the wind sounded like it had gone around. When it did move through, it carried smoke. Not strong, just enough to let me know I wasn't imagining last night. I ate a bar because I couldn't make myself light the stove. I watched shadows get long. I told myself I'd start walking at first light and not stop until I saw the kiosk. Night 3. They come. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want a glow that said, right here. I sat in the tent as it got dark and tried breathing like the apps tell you. Count in, hold, out. Except there was no app, and the counting didn't help. The first voices came in soft, like they were just two people talking while they walked a trail. I heard a man laugh. Not a cackle, not creepy. Just a normal laugh, which made it worse somehow. Then I saw the light drift between trunks to my left. Lantern, not a headlamp. Another to the right, another farther back. Slow. They weren't searching like cops. They were spreading in a line and closing. My mouth went dry so fast I thought I might gag. I did the only thing that made sense. I killed my little tent light and crouched, knife in hand, pack against my shins. The nylon felt thin as paper. The older woman's voice cut through between the other sounds, easy to hear because my brain was tuned to it. "You should have gone," she called. Not a shout, just loud enough. "You were told to leave." A man's voice off to my right. "She's here somewhere." Another farther back. "Ridge girl, come out. We need to talk." "No thanks," I said in my head, because saying it out loud would have been insane. The nearest lantern stopped. "Tent," a man said, closer. Cloth whispered. Footsteps in a half circle. Someone's shadow passed across the wall, and I could see their shoulders, their hat shape, the line of their arm. The shadow paused right in front of me. It leaned like the person leaned, curious. I heard a zipper click. Not mine. The sound of fingers on metal. The hand brushed the tent near the corner. Then the whole front panel jerked sideways as someone yanked a guy line hard. "Don't rip it," the woman snapped. Tone like a foreman stopping sloppy work. "Cheap shelter's not protection, just pull it." My skin tried to crawl off my body. I didn't decide to move. My body moved. I dug my fingers under the seam behind me, grabbed the little emergency blade from my pocket, cut a slit, shoved my pack through, and rolled after it. The knife caught on the fabric and I almost cut my own hand. I got one boot under me and pushed. I came up behind the tent, knees and hands already wet, flashlight in my left hand, knife in my right. I didn't turn the light on. I ran blind for the first 3 strides and then clicked it and kept it low to see my feet. The first yell came a second later. "She's out," a man shouted, pissed. "Back!" Behind. "Get her bag," another yelled. Boots thumped. A lantern crashed. Someone swore. Adrenaline put a taste in my mouth like metal. I aimed for darker spaces between trunks. My light strobed across roots. I ate dirt once and scrambled up with a handful of needles stuck to my palm. Behind me, the woman yelled, and it wasn't calm anymore. "Go wide. Stay on her. Do not lose her." Her voice had an edge like she'd dropped whatever friendly mask she thought she needed. "I see her," a man to my left yelled. He didn't. His light swung the wrong way. A hand grabbed the strap of my pack and yanked me sideways. I went down hard. The breath left me. I twisted and the strap slid off my shoulder. He got the pack, not me. I heard the zipper rip as he tried to get at it while he ran. "Drop the bag, idiot," another man barked. "She's the point." I kept moving. I put the flashlight between my teeth to climb a little rise and almost gagged on the dirty rubber. When the ground fell away, I couldn't stop, so I rode it, skidding on my ass through cold leaves, bumping off rock. I hit the bottom, rolled under a downed log that made a low triangle with a root ball, and pulled leaves over my legs with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I killed the light. I breathed shallow and tried not to choke. Boots thudded above the lip of the slope. Lights swung back and forth. The woman came to the edge. I could see her silhouette cut by the glow behind her. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't raise her stick like a witch in a movie. She stood with her weight on one leg like her knee hurt and she was annoyed. "Listen," she called. Not to me only, to her people. "You ignored the warnings and looked. That was your choice, but you don't get to bring it out. Not this time." "I'm not bringing anything," I thought in my head. "I just want to go home." Someone slid down the slope sideways and slid too far, cursing. "Fuck, she was here," he said, pointing at a scuff I could see from under my log. He swung his light across the ground and it splashed white over my hands. I pulled them back so slow it hurt. The light moved on. "She's close," another said. "She's small." She didn't go far. I put my palm over my mouth. The noise my chest wanted to make would have given me away. A spider web crawled across my cheek. I didn't move. The woman stepped to the edge of the slope and looked down into the brush without crouching. "We finish before moon," she said to nobody and everybody. To me, she said, "If you run again, it'll be worse. Come out." Silence. Crunch of leaves. Lantern hiss. My heartbeat made a clicking in my ear like it was tapping bone. "She'll sit in her fear," a man said close above me. "Let the dark cook her. We'll find her at first light." He sounded like he believed it. He sounded like this wasn't the first time they'd done this. "Spread out and listen," the woman said. "No fires near the road. No talking past the creek." Then, hard and simple, "No witnesses this time." Something in my head tried to jump me into standing up and sprinting. My body ignored it and did the smarter thing. Nothing. I lay there and let my face go numb. After a long stretch of nothing but breath and small twigs settling, their lights began to thin. One moved farther down the creek. One went back up toward my camp. One swung wide and then back like a lazy search pattern. Then all of them were gone except a faint glow downslope that I think was a lantern left on a stump. I didn't move for hours. I don't know how many. It was night. It stayed night. At some point I realized I'd been listening to my own breath like it was an enemy and forced myself to count the space between inhales. When my teeth started to chatter, my body wanted to do it hard enough to rattle the log. I bit the outside of my hand and pressed until my jaw calmed down. I think I dozed a few seconds at a time. Shock naps, then snapped awake to nothing. Dawn. When the black started to go gray, I cried without sound because I didn't have the luxury of a big one. I rolled out from under the log slow and 100 years old. I couldn't feel my right knee properly. It had a hot sting where I'd ripped it, and the fabric was stiff with blood. My hands were raw where I'd grabbed bark. I moved 2 trees, stopped, listened, moved 2 more. I wanted to run back to camp for my stuff and then wanted to slap myself for thinking I needed anything that bad. I crept to the edge of the ridge above my campsite and looked. The pad was flattened like a truck had driven over it. My tent was a tarp now, cut and stomped into the ground. The fire ring was gone. Someone had kicked the stones out and raked the ash into dirt. My pot was gone. My bear line still hung from the branch, but the bag at the end was missing. A pile of stones sat where my table had been like a tidy placeholder, domestic as hell, and that made me angrier than anything. They hadn't left a threat. They hadn't left a symbol. They'd erased me like I hadn't existed. Fuck them. I didn't go down. I didn't want to set a foot on the pad. I turned and went the other direction, keeping the bowl of the valley on my left so I wouldn't wander into their fire circle by accident. I moved slow and quiet for maybe 20 minutes and then fast and stupid for 10 because fear ran my feet. The sun finally got high enough to mean something. My breath stopped smoking. I kept expecting to hear boots behind me and only heard my own dumb steps, which I hated. The park road popped into view like a trick of light, and then it was actually there. The straight cut through trees, ruts and mud, rangers' tire tracks. I walked into the middle of it and stood there because being in the open felt both good and wrong. I listened hard enough to give myself a headache. Nothing. I followed the road toward the kiosk with my eyes on the ditch in case a truck came at speed. I didn't wave at the first truck. I hid behind a stump until I saw the tan paint and green stripe, and then I stepped out and flagged with both arms. The ranger was mid-30s, beard that tried to look older, coffee breath. He did the scanning thing all first responders do when they arrive, eyes on my hands first, then the rest. "Are you hurt?" he said. "Knee," I said. "Fell. There's a group out there." I had to stop and swallow. "They followed me last night. They tried to pull my tent down with me in it. They took my stuff. I couldn't say, "They killed a deer around a fire" like it was a church service. It felt like a sentence that would make him look at me like I was making it up. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't tell me I was hysterical. He put me in the passenger seat and radioed that he had one hiker shaken non-critical and was going to take a look at the reported encampment. He asked me to point at a map, so I pointed to the ridge and then the valley, and then the line where I thought their fires had been. He called another unit. We drove to the kiosk where another ranger waited. They asked me the same questions. I told it straight. Older woman, strong, stick, weird lines, fires, deer, a dozen or so people. Not homeless camp, not weekend partiers. Organized. They asked if I could show them my camp. I said yes and hated myself for saying yes. We drove as close as the road allowed and then walked, the two of them moving like they were trained for this and me moving like a drunk deer. My campsite looked like it had from the ridge. They took photos. One crouched and lifted the tarp with a stick like a cop on TV checking for a body. There wasn't one because I was the body and I was standing there like an idiot. They frowned at the cut rope ends. One measured boot prints. The prints were clear, more than one size, more than one tread, all over. They kept their voices level and professional, but they didn't do the, "You imagined this" dance. The younger one said, "We've had reports before. A group squats here deep. They move every few months. They're big on the return to the land thing. They like to scare folks off. You're not the first." "I watched them cut a deer," I said. It came out more like a cough than a sentence. He nodded once like that lined up with something in his head he didn't like. "We'll get wildlife to look where you saw the fires," he said. "Don't," I started to say, "don't go alone," like I had any say, like I'd become the guardian of anyone else's safety out here. I stopped. They walked me back to the truck, bandaged my knee with a little sterile pad and tape, poured me water from a jug, and told me to sit still while they radioed. The older one said, "File a report at the station and then rest. Don't go back in. We'll sweep." He said it like he wanted to make sure I understood he wasn't asking. The report room at the station smelled like coffee, pine cleaner, and damp paper. I gave my name and number and route. I said I'd share coordinates later when my hands weren't shaking. I knew I had them in Gaia GPS. I hadn't dared unlock my phone in the woods to check. They took the cut end of rope like it was evidence, because I think it was. I signed a piece of paper with a pen 100 other people have used to sign 100 other dumb things that happened in the woods. The younger ranger walked me out. "You did the right thing," he said. "You ran." His tone made it clear this was the correct choice. He didn't say, "Next time, leave it first weird." "I should have gone after I saw her," I said. He didn't argue. Home. I drove home on auto, hands white on the wheel, checking the mirror more times than was useful. Every time I passed trees, I expected to see orange low in them and a line of people moving between like a dance. I didn't. It was just trees. I got here, locked the door, and did that thing where you wash your hands like the dirt is a disease. Then I sat on the floor because my legs weren't going to hold me if I pretended to be normal on a chair. I tried calling you. It rang and went to voicemail twice. I didn't leave a message because I knew I had to write this down or I'd start softening it to make it easier to say out loud. So here's the part where I say the thing I don't want to say. They weren't just doing some weird nature circle. They were warning me, and when I didn't leave, they escalated. Deer first, in the open, with enough light to make sure I saw. Then the little camp edits, rope cut, water dumped, the bundle of sticks, polite but very clear. Then they came to take me. That's not me being paranoid. That's a sequence. The woman saw me. She warned the others. She told me not to look. I looked. They decided I was a problem. The switch from calm to get her wasn't random. They were trying to erase me before I got to a road and talked. I don't think they wanted to initiate me or any of that bullshit. They weren't trying to recruit. They were trying to make sure there wasn't a witness. They're not mystics. They're not a movie cult. They're off-grid assholes who convince themselves the forest is theirs and everybody else is trash. They'll use whatever language dresses that up. Returning the blood. Fixing the land. Fear is fuel. It's just control with dirt on it. I'm going to sleep now if I can. If I can't, at least I'll be horizontal in a locked room. If you don't hear from me tomorrow, call me. If I don't pick up, call again. If I still don't pick up, call the ranger station and ask if they found anything at the ridge. Tell them I talked to the younger one with the beard and the 2 clean boots. He'll remember me. My knee will make sure of it. One last thing. If you camp near that area again and you see fires off the ridge after midnight, don't go look. Don't stand and listen. Don't rationalize it like I did. Pack your shit. Walk to the road. If you hear voices, don't answer. They don't need a reason. You won't get another warning. L. Postscript from me. I tried Lena's number the next morning. Disconnected. I called the ranger station and asked to follow up on an incident report. They said they couldn't share details, but the area past the fire road was temporarily closed due to hazards. A week later, a local Facebook group posted a photo of 3 ranger trucks and 2 county SUVs at a pullout by the old campground. The caption said, "Illegal encampments cleared." No arrests were mentioned. That's all I've got. If you camp anywhere near Camp 9 and see lights in the trees at night, don't play detective. Leave. My friend just got back from a camping trip. Please never go camping alone. Hey all. I've been a lurker here for a while, but today something happened that I felt I had to share with no sleep. The only word I can think of to describe the way that I feel right now is shocked. I'm writing because, to be honest, I'm a little freaked out right now. Just to clarify, I'm totally fine. It's my friend Kate who I'm worried about. She just returned from a few days of paid vacation that she spent camping in the Adirondacks and just contacted me about what happened during her trip. Below is the email she wrote me. I think she wrote it both to get her own thoughts straight as well as to share the story, so I'm pasting her recap of the trip unedited right below. Since it was addressed to me, there's going to be a few things you won't get, but they don't really affect the overall main points. Anyway, here it is. Begin email. I've always loved nature, you know that. The fresh air, natural sounds, just being able to take a break from the world. It's all there. Like I've told you many times, I'll take a weaving walk between pine trees and thorny underbrush over a weaving commute between sullen-faced New Yorkers any day of the week. And last week, when life got a little too hectic, I decided to do just that. The breakup with Steve last Tuesday had really just been the icing on the cake. I know I told you about this briefly, but it ended pretty ugly. He didn't take it well. But then again, we really didn't expect him to, did we? Should have listened to that old advice. Never date a coworker. He just got too clingy and possessive. Whatever. We'll catch up on that another time. Point is, after all of that garbage, I was done. I planned to use some of my few vacation days at work and scheduled a several days-long solo camping trip in the Adirondacks. My family used to go camping there all the time when I was younger. It's just therapeutic for me now. I packed everything a day in advance to make sure everything was ready. A tent, sleeping bag, cooking supplies and food, flashlights with extra batteries, first aid, and even my new camera. I wanted to make sure I got some great shots of the outdoors. That way I'd have something to put on the wall when I was back at work and needed a pick-me-up. There were a few things I certainly wasn't bringing, though. I was leaving my iPhone, laptop, all of that more modern stuff at home. It's not like I'd have Wi-Fi or be able to recharge them out there anyway. One small concession, though. I did opt to bring my old iPod. Music and nature mesh together pretty nicely, and it's a bit obsolete now, so no worries if I lost it. Anyway, I was all set to go and ready to rock and roll. The next day, I woke up bright and early, drove out a few hours, ditched my car in one of the camper lots, and off I went. It was amazing. I hadn't been out hiking or camping in years. It was exactly what I needed after a couple particularly rough weeks. After a couple of minutes bobbing along to my own beat, the past few weeks had become a distant memory, washed away like the dirt off my boots when I jumped in the first creek I found. Alright, yeah, I know wet socks and hiking don't mix, but I was just too stoked to be out in the wilderness again. Anyway, things were pretty uneventful for most of the first day, until around late afternoon. As the sun started to set, the light filtering through the trees started striking me right in the face. I held up a hand to block it, cursing myself for forgetting sunglasses. You can never remember everything, right? When I took my hand away for a moment, I noticed my arm had been blocking my view of something up ahead. A person. I'm not the type to make friends with random hikers in the woods, but I was in such a good mood that I continued on my way and approached this stranger. I waved a quick salutation as I got closer, and he returned in kind. "Hi there," I said enthusiastically. "I'm Kate. Nice to meet ya." Have you ever gotten that feeling that someone is a bit off, and you can tell within a few seconds of meeting them? I got that feeling from this guy. Hard. "Oh, hello. What's a pretty girl like you doing all the way out here?" he replied. Not the creepiest thing you could say, but I still really didn't like the way he said it. "Camping," I chirped back. "Out from the city for a few days to get away from it all, you know?" He tilted his head. "Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not from the city, but I know what you mean. Sometimes you just need to get away from people." His voice trailed off as he stared off into the distance. Then he promptly snapped his eyes right back to me. "Are you camping with anyone else?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. I suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Yes. My boyfriend. He's nearby, scoping out a campsite for tonight," I lied, feeling my face grow hot. I'm a terrible liar. Why would we split up while hiking? I doubt he actually believed me. He was silent for a moment before replying, "Oh, all right then. Well, you two be careful, you hear? There's a lot that can happen out here." He smiled slightly, nodded his head, and then walked off. He'd never even told me his name. Weird. I suddenly felt a lot more vulnerable out in the heart of where I've always felt home. I shook off the chill running down my spine. He was probably just another hiker, just a little weird. Nothing to freak out over. Regardless, I did notice that the sun was getting close to setting, and I needed to set up camp. A few minutes of hiking later, I found a suitable spot. I unloaded everything from my pack and set up my small tent pretty quickly. I felt pretty accomplished after doing that and made sure to take a photo of my newly finished tent. Something to bring along next time I see my parents, to show them I've still got the nature girl in me. After that, I scavenged around the area for enough wood to sustain a fire, cooked a quick dinner, and laid down next to the small fire I had going. This was another one of my favorite parts, just listening to the nighttime sounds. Cricket chirps, occasional owl hoots, and even the incessant bastard cries of the whippoorwill were a welcome change of pace for me. Stargazing was also a favorite, but the sky wasn't that good that night since there was a near full moon outshining most of the stars. It was pretty cold later that night, since it still isn't quite summer yet, so I was bundled up tight in my tent and took a bit of time to doze off. Compared to the past few weeks of trying to sleep, I felt totally relaxed. No need to wake up early for work tomorrow or to deal with the hassle of commuting. I could sleep in and relax. Not even the nearby crackling of underbrush I heard from a raccoon or fox walking by was going to rattle me, even though it used to freak me out as a child. Even though it didn't freak me out anymore, I slipped in my earbuds and played some relaxing songs on my iPod as I dozed off, just to be sure that wouldn't keep me up through the middle of the night. I slept like a rock that night and woke up refreshed and ready to go midway through the morning. After deconstructing my campsite, I continued on my way, going with the route I had planned out before starting my trip. The second day was even greater than the first. I hadn't felt that alive in years. I made sure to snap a bunch of nature photos throughout the day and even took a few shameless selfies of me in the woods. I also met a few other hikers/campers. They were a nice couple around my age, maybe a little older. I had a nice 10-minute chat with them and found out they had a lot in common with me. They actually reminded me a bit of me and Steve early on in our relationship, before things started sucking. I didn't think of that at the time, but I did after they happened to ask me an interesting question. They asked if I was out camping with my boyfriend. I was a little taken aback. The question resurfaced some recent memories I didn't want on my mind, but I told them it was just me. They said they had run into another guy not too long ago who said he was camping with a girl, but they were separated for a bit. That was interesting. The Adirondacks were a bit more crowded than I remembered them being, especially since it really wasn't even camping season yet. The nights are still a bit too nippy for most. Not for this couple, though. They both loved nature and were psyched to be out and about. I actually kind of wished I had stayed with them. Maybe then my trip would have turned out differently. Anyway, I've tried to paint a pretty detailed picture of what the trip had been for me so far, so that I can frame what happened next a little better. Remember what Danny always said? Shit just got real, man. Well, shit's about to get real. When the sun started setting, I picked my second campsite that I'd be using for the upcoming night. I did everything pretty much identical to what I described last night. Set up tent, firewood, cooking, fire, etc. When I was through with soaking up the stars and nature sounds, I got in my tent for the night, curled up in my sleeping bag, and started to get ready to sleep. I wasn't too tired yet, though, so I decided to reflect on my day a bit. Hanging my flashlight as a makeshift lantern, I rummaged through my belongings until I found my digital camera and started going through all of the pictures I had taken over the course of the day. There were some really great nature shots, interspersed with my lovely selfies, of course. I think I went a little overboard on the trees, though. After going through the 10th seemingly identical tree shot, I just skipped the camera to the start of the pictures so I could see what else I took before going tree crazy. I accidentally went a little too far, though. God damn, I still had the most recent pictures of me and Steve on there. It's seriously like that thing just keeps following me everywhere. I hastily skipped forward through those before getting to the pictures I took on the start of the trip. There was one of my waving goodbye to my car, i.e. civilization, the first creek I found, and a few shots from the first day. Then there was a shot of my tent that I'd taken right after I finished setting it up, before wandering around to get firewood. I clicked forward to the next picture, another shot of my beautiful tent. I stopped, curious. This one was taken when it was way darker. The tent was visible only by moonlight. I froze, and it dawned on me. I had not taken that picture. My heart started to race. No, calm down, I thought to myself. Maybe you did take that picture, right before bed. Hands trembling, I clicked forward to the next picture. It was my tent, lit by moonlight. Again, what the actual fuck? My heart was pounding like a jackhammer at this point. I didn't know what to think. I clicked forward again. My tent lit by moonlight, but closer, taking up more of the frame. No, this can't be real. I clicked forward again, an even closer shot of my tent, with almost none of the dark surrounding woods visible. I was about to cry from how freaked out I was. Please stop now. But I had to know. I couldn't stop myself from clicking forward again. This time, a hand visible in the picture, reaching towards my tent's zipper. I was now fighting back sobs of terror. Click. A hand unzipping my tent's flap. Click. A view of the inside of my tent. Click. Me, sleeping. Click. I couldn't stop myself. I let out a loud sob of terror at this point. Just then, I heard a loud crack outside of my tent, like I had surprised something with the noise. I became dead silent, straining to hear anything over the sound of my furiously beating heart. Silence. Where did the sound come from? I shivered as icy chills ran through me. What if they're out there now? I had no idea what to do. Never in my entire life had I ever felt so terrified or alone. What was I supposed to do? As much as I wanted to just nope the fuck right out of there, it was the middle of the night. He, she, whatever could be anywhere. So I did the only thing I could think to do, nearly paralyzed by my fear. You know when you used to be a little kid, and you would wake up in the middle of the night really having to pee, but would be too afraid to leave your bed since monsters might grab your legs from under the bed if you got up so you didn't pee? Well, that's what I did. I was too scared to move. Trembling, I turned off the flashlight and laid my head down. If you had any doubt over my decision-making abilities before this, please allow me to clarify. They are terrible. There was no way I was sleeping that night, that's for sure. I just laid there, eyes wide open, heart racing. I laid there for what seemed like an eternity, praying for the sun to come up so it would all be all right. And then I heard it. The cracking of leaves and underbrush, the shuffling of footsteps. Slowly, steadily, stealthily, coming closer and closer. I would have gladly taken a pissed-off mother grizzly bear in place of what I knew those footsteps must have belonged to. They were back. I had no weapons, no courage, and no time. I did literally the only thing I could think to do. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. Mind racing, I listened. The footsteps had stopped. I dared for a moment to let myself believe that everything was okay. It was just a wild animal. This is all just crazy. And then I heard the zipper, slowly pulling the flap open. Eyes shut, I couldn't see who it was. But I could hear. I could hear them breathing as they looked around the inside of the tent. I could hear them as they stealthily climbed into the tent. I could hear them move right up beside me. I could feel their hot breath on my cheek, their face only inches from mine. And I could feel their finger slowly pushing a strand of my hair back behind my ear. I don't know how I did it, but I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't open my eyes. I just lay there, paralyzed by fear, realizing my life could end at any moment. After an eternity, the hot breath was gone. I heard more movement, then a zipper, and then stealthy footsteps slowly moving away. But not before I heard one last thing. After a few steps, the footsteps stopped, and then they uttered 3 words that will haunt me until the day I die. Sweet dreams, Kate. I lay awake that entire night, twitching at any sound, too afraid to do anything. The moment the sun came up, I was out of there. I packed up in record time and retraced my path at a strong power walk, checking over my shoulder and looking around everywhere. Meanwhile, my mind was racing. How did they know? My name? I really don't know. It could have been that creepy hiker I met my first day. I have no idea. I got back to my car and immediately called the police. As I told them what happened and insisted I had proof, I had the worst realization possible. I had been so freaked out and speeding while packing that morning that I hadn't even realized until just that moment. My camera was gone. Did I drop it or leave it behind? I can't say for sure. I think that creep must have grabbed it when he was right next to me in the tent. It had been in arm's reach. The police said that they would look into it, but I'm not sure how they can investigate this. I couldn't give an exact location of where my campsite was, and what could they do with that information anyway? As I write this now, I am thoroughly freaked out and just trying to get down everything that happened. I still have another scheduled day of paid vacation that I think I really need, so I'm going to stay in tomorrow and just try to get my thoughts in order. Thank you for listening to me throughout this. I am just so rattled, it's unbelievable. If you have the time, I would really appreciate it if you could meet up with me tomorrow to talk. End email. Don't go camping alone ever. I ain't scared of nothing. That's what I yelled to my brother as I slammed the door to my car shut. Things have, changed since then. I've changed. I remember his smirk, how he held out my jacket, the way he spouted off an endless list of things I should be scared of, skinwalkers and witches and werewolves. He presented each one as reason after reason of why this idea was stupid, saying I still had time to flake out, save face. I remember rolling my eyes, snatching my jacket from his grasp, sliding into my car and yelling that I'm not scared before speeding away towards the darkening outline of the mountains. They stood out stark against the setting sun like teeth. Boy, how I wish I listened. I was wrong. He was right. I'm fucking scared. Let me back up a bit. It all started about 2 days ago. I was out of my mind depressed, could barely get out of bed, thought about chucking myself in front of cars, over bridges, off buildings, just dying. I thought about dying all the time, and enough was enough. One of the few friends I had suggested that I try solo camping said it might clear my mind, that the wilderness, the silence, the solitude would do me good. He gave me a list of spots, some more isolated than the others. I decided on the most isolated one, which was about a 3-hour hike from the last campsite far out in the Rocky Mountain National Forest. I remember his face, the surprise, the acceptance. "You sure?" His voice cracked. I nodded, saying nothing. "Okay. I mean, it's a pretty secluded place, especially for a first-time camper." He shrugged. "But, then again, it's a beautiful spot. It'll definitely give you some perspective, and the night sky out there is insane." I thanked him and turned to leave, but he spoke up again. "Hey, don't let the forest spook you, okay?" A word of advice from a veteran. Don't go out at night no matter what you hear. You might get totally fucked by a bear or lion. The drive up the mountains was strangely soothing. The gently curving roads that wove their way through the trees and up the rocks were exciting to navigate, and soon my mind was eased into a peaceful contemplation. I had decided to forego electronics this trip, even going as far as securing my phone in my glove box. I wanted to be completely free of all that shit, able to focus on the now rather than ruminate about the past or fear the future. I would be gone for 5 days and 4 nights, enough time for me to hopefully recuperate and reassess my life and what I was doing with it. I soon descended into Estes Park and drove through the picturesque town towards RMNP, willing myself not to stay at the Stanley instead. I found the entrance to the park with ease and continued to the closest lot to my campsite. Night was now falling, and I silently cursed myself for leaving so late. I sat in my car for a good 30 minutes before deciding that it would be too risky hiking 3 hours in near pitch black. There were 4 other tents set up in the lot I was at with room for one more, and soon I had my own tent set up. That night passed comfortably. I was surrounded by chatting, laughing people and unruly but happy children who ran round and round screaming. A few of them offered me roasted hot dogs and s'mores and beers, and I filled my belly, smiling. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag before the last light from the dying embers faded away. The second night didn't go so smoothly. I woke up late, well-rested, but still groggy, and took my time repacking my tent. I hesitated at first, wondering if I should just stay there, but at 3 p.m. another family showed up with proof they had reserved the site. So, I gathered my things and set off, and immediately got lost. Navigating by map and compass for the first time and alone is a lot harder than it sounds. And the trees. The trees can be misleading, can turn you around, make you think you're on the right path when really you're miles from where you're supposed to be. Instead of taking me 3 hours to get to the site, it took me nearly twice that time, and I was swiftly losing what little light was left in the day. Finally, I found the site. But before I breathed a sigh of relief, I haphazardly set up my tent, building a small fire in front. It was dark now and I was jumpy. Every sound I heard was seemingly magnified, every shadow cast by the dim light of the fire, a menace. Spooked, I crawled into the tent and curled up in my bag, trying to will myself into sleep. After a while I was dozing, about to drift off, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a foot crunching outside. My eyes shot open and I reached for my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I waited. I heard the sound again. Someone or something was definitely walking around my tent. It sounded like whatever they was trying to be quiet, stealthy. That went on for hours in inconsistent bursts until I finally decided it was an animal, scavenging for the scraps or inspecting my tent. By dawn, I was dozing again and the noise had finally stopped. I told myself I would sleep for an hour or two, giving myself time to rest up. I woke up disoriented, exhausted, and started to panic before remembering I was out camping and that I needed to start hiking back. Now. But when I exited the tent, I saw that the sun was already setting. To say I was upset would be an understatement. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave, see how far I could get out there. But deep down, I knew I'd instantly get lost and probably end up in a worse situation. So, I began collecting as much wood as I could to build a big-ass fire and prepared to hunker down for the night. The light from the sun seemed to disappear unfathomably fast. The third night was, pretty problematic. I sat awake in my tent for hours after the sun went down, waiting. I'd left the fire going for as long as the wood lasted. I know this isn't kosher for camping, but I was improvising, and I was absolutely terrified. The darkness around me seemed to crush the light from the fire, making it seem small, pathetic, a tiny candle in a sea of shadows. For hours I sat there, listening, afraid. Finally, I realized I was just being ridiculous, that what I had heard the night before was nothing to fear, that my subconscious, my monkey mind, was just playing tricks on me, keeping me alert for no reason. So I bundled myself up and laid down, and I heard it. Softly at first. A footstep, then 2, 3, growing louder, bolder. I sat up and felt my eyes increase to the size of saucers and my breath quickened. What was that? I had to know. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I was operating purely off of fear. I heard the noise. It sounded like something running and running around and around my tent. Suddenly, the side of my tent pushed in as if someone was slapping it from the outside. "Hey!" I yelled, scared out of my wits. "Hey, I'm awake! I'm in here!" I tried to stand, tripping myself up in my sleeping bag in the process, and slammed into the front of the tent. Scrambling up, I swiftly unzipped the flap and ran outside with a red-tinted flashlight. I saw a shape scurry away and followed. And there, standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were standing with their back towards me. Their arms were hanging in strange positions by their sides. Their head pointed straight away from me. I took a step towards them, and a branch cracked underneath me. The sound seemed to startle the person, and they turned their head ever so slightly. "Hey," I said again. "What the fuck, man?" And it boiled up, a sound that crescendoed into a scream. It was laughter, and it echoed around me, rattling around in my skull. I ran, leaping into my tent, zipping it up behind me, curling into my sleeping bag, crying, and the world around me exploded, or rather imploded. The walls of the tent shook, like hundreds of hands were slapping it, poking it, punching it. Outside, what sounded like dozens of people running around shattered the silence. I don't know how or when I fell asleep. I think I fainted. Either way, I woke up the next day to a reddish glow encompassing my surroundings. I sat up and ran outside, looking around for proof of what I had heard. But there was nothing. No footprints, handprints, or any disturbance at all. "Fuck this," I muttered to myself, throwing my things chaotically into my bag. I would leave today, in the dark. I couldn't stay another night here. I was just starting to unpole the tent when I heard it, a sound in the distance, perhaps carried to me by the wind which was picking up around me. "Help me! Help me! Please! Oh God, help me!" I reacted more out of instinct than logic and began running towards the sound before realizing that I, in no way, was in a place to help whoever was screaming. Still, I tried to locate the source of the sound, following the voice for about 30 minutes. "Where are you?" I yelled, looking around me through the maze of trees. "I'm here, where are you?" Quickly, the screams descended into a deep, unsettling laughter. Scared out of my mind, I turned and ran back the way I came. By some miracle, I made it back to my site, grabbed my pack, and uprooted the poles of the tent, thinking that I would just roll it up and carry it back instead of taking the time to fold it neatly and shove it into its bag. Around me, the mountains loomed up like fangs, like I was about to be swallowed whole by a monstrous mouth. As I pulled each pole, the tent fell a little, but it was only on the third pole of out 6 that I realized it wasn't falling fully flat. Confused, I peered into the tent and reeled in horror, too afraid to even scream. There was someone sitting inside, but not just anyone. It was me. Sitting there, paler and bone-thin, a too-wide grin plastered on my face. A single droplet of blood rolled down from each eye which, instead of having green irises, were totally, wholly black. I jumped back, tripping over my own feet. Laughter rose up around me, and as I scrambled up I saw my hand that was not my hand reach out from the tent, followed swiftly by the other, then the head. My face, that was not my face, looked up at me, still smiling, then laughed again. I screamed, I stood, I ran, and I ran. I didn't even know if I was running the right way. I couldn't even use the sun anymore for guidance since it had almost fully set. I ran without looking where I was going. I kept looking behind me to see if that thing, was following me. I could feel the trees scratching me up, pushing against me like they were trying to hold me back, hold me still until that thing came for me. Suddenly a light flashed in my face and I ran into something solid, something black, something that wrapped around me. I instantly cowered, hiding my face in my hands. Shit. Oh, please God, no, 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 no. I heard my own voice, terrified, shaking. Hey, calm down. It's okay. You just scared me. Calm down. What's wrong? I looked up and into the worried gray eyes of a human face. The face of a middle-aged man, to be exact. He was holding me up. The flashlight he was using lay fallen at our feet, creating strange shadows behind us. I looked back, fearful of what I might see, but there was nothing, only trees swinging slowly in the slight breeze. Hey, he said again. Was that you? Screaming? I came out here to check. I couldn't speak, I was too terrified. I shook my head. Were you camping out there alone? He asked, letting me go and bending down to retrieve the flashlight. I nodded, then began crying. Hey, it's okay. It can be spooky out here. Come on, my car is right over there. He gestured with his head back behind him. I wiped my nose and blinked, finally finding my voice. Who are you? He glanced at me then away. I'm, a park ranger. But he didn't look like one. He was wearing a smooth black suit, black tie, and white shirt, and his shoes were polished leather, not hiking boots. Come on, he said again, taking my pack and swinging it onto his back. As he did so, his jacket flapped slightly, and I saw what looked like a Sig Sauer handgun strapped to his belt. Okay, I said, looking back behind me again. How did you find me? He shrugged. Good hearing. We entered a small clearing and I saw a matte black SUV with tinted windows, headlights flaring, engine idling, parked in the middle of it. He popped the trunk and threw my bag in as I climbed into the passenger side seat. He climbed in the driver's seat and asked me where he should take me. I told him the lot number and we were on our way. After a few moments, he flipped the cubby between us open and pulled out a bag. Corn nuts? He asked, holding out the bag to me. I took it gratefully and began chomping away. I licked my fingers, then looked back at him. So, are you really a ranger? He looked at me, then back to the road, but still I stared at him, transfixed. He looked exhausted, his wood-colored hair disheveled and dirty from the forest. The SUV jerked to a sudden stop, and the man let out a slow, low breath. His eyes narrowed, and he looked over at me, then back to the dirt trail in front of us. I followed his gaze, feeling the fear churning up inside me. And there, in the middle of the road, was me. The me that was not me. Its limbs hung limply, as if they were broken, and that sickly smile was still plastered across the face. It waved. The man looked back at me, then back at the thing that was not me, then back at me. I met his gaze. I don't get paid enough for this shit, the man muttered before slamming his foot on the accelerator straight towards the thing. We both felt the impact. The car bounced over the body and the man kept driving. But around us, in between the trees, stirred into the darkness, laughter boiled up, manic and persistent. We reached the lot in silence, bathed in the first light of the rising sun. The man beside me seemed to be deep in thought, distracted. I was still scared, but hopeful that whatever that thing was, it was now dead, crushed by the car, or at least so badly wounded that it would soon succumb. The SUV slowed to a stop and the man popped the trunk and hopped out. He walked to the back and grabbed my pack as I jumped out. He handed to me and I took it, then thanked him for everything. No problem, he said, all in a day's or night's work. His lips quivered as if he was about to smile. I turned to leave, but he spoke up again. Hey. I turned to face him again. If you ever want to talk about what you, saw or, just talk, call me. He held out a card. I took it and looked down at it. It was matte black and only had a single number written on it. There was no area code. Then, I began, but I heard a door slam and looked up. The man was already back in his car. He waved at me, then sped off back the way we had come, back towards that thing. I shoved the card in my pocket, climbed into my car, and left, breathing a sigh of relief. I still haven't told anyone about what happened, even when they asked why I refused to go camping ever again. I just shrug and tell them it wasn't my thing, that I prefer a warm bed and the bustling sounds of a busy city. Every so often, though, I'll pull out the card, my fingers lingering over my phone, wondering if I should call, wondering who the man really was and if he'd really be able to explain what happened to me. I like camping, not the expensive version with rooftop tents and staged photos. A flat pad, a mid-range tent, a stove that always smells faintly like white gas. I plan trips in spreadsheets, drive time, daylight, water sources, weather swings. I keep a small tub in my trunk with the usual suspects because I hate hunting for a headlamp at 10 p.m. I've camped up and down California, Big Basin before the fire, a winter shoulder season loop in Yosemite when the bathrooms are locked, county parks where the raccoons are braver than the locals. No horror stories, some lousy neighbors, a blown zipper once. I've even gone alone and slept fine. This trip was supposed to be easy. Late fall, 3 days, 3 friends. I'd booked a state forest about 2 hours from home. Smaller than the marquee parks, nothing Instagram famous, just 2 loops, a creek that runs in spring, and long, quiet shoulder seasons. It was me, Rowan, and Dev. We're not a dramatic trio. We met in our early 20s, stayed friends, and got used to each other's roles. I over-prepare and double-check forecasts. Rowan knows knots and carries a tiny sharpening stone like a talisman. Dev keeps a medkit in the car because they actually enjoy being prepared for other people's nonsense. We hit the forest after 4 on a Thursday with just enough light to set up before the cold took the ground. The ranger station had its blinds down and a paper sign on the door that said, "Back Monday." It was Thursday. The bathrooms were shuttered with chains through the handles. The faucets were wrapped in plastic with a padlock through the spigot. We had water jugs and didn't care. The loops were nearly empty. No cars, no clipped tags on the signposts, nothing that looked like people. We took Site 19 on the outer edge of the open loop. A crooked post, a flat square where the dirt showed through the needles, pines on 3 sides, and a thin line of brush before the land dropped away. The road was visible through the trees if you looked for it. I liked the shape of it. Enough distance from the next post that voices wouldn't carry, and a long, clean view from the table to the fire ring to the food tree. We popped the tent fast, ran a tarp line, shook out the sleeping bags before they turned into boards. Dev, who always says they'll save the good snacks for night 2, opened the expensive kettle chips 10 minutes after the cooler hit the table. 5-star isolation, Dev said, raising the bag like a toast. 0 neighbors, 0 Bluetooth speakers, 0 guitar guy. 6 stars, Rowan said. It's quiet enough to hear yourself think. Or other things. Please don't say other things, I said. We cooked dinner without ceremony, sausage on tortillas, hot chocolate in the pot because the air lost its friendliness as soon as the sun slid behind the trees. Rowan sat on the table and tied, untied, and retied a taut line hitch on the tarp guy line because that's their fidget. I checked the forecast one more time even though we were already there. We watched the fire settle. The dark felt like the campground was holding its breath in a good way. At 10 or so, we doused the ring, killed the lantern, and zipped ourselves into nylon rooms. I woke up in the after-midnight dead spot to footsteps. Not wind, not a pine cone. Footsteps on packed dirt, on our pad. 2. Then a pause that felt like someone listening. Then 2 more. I froze and let my ears do what they do. The sound was close. Brushlight, cautious, not big. My tent wall shifted a fraction. I tasted metal from holding my breath too long. The steps moved slowly past my door, a scrape of grit, then nothing. I told myself it was a deer and made myself believe it. I fell back asleep because bodies sometimes override brains. Morning had the kind of cold that flashes your breath in a hard white line. The fire ring was a neat crater of ash and half-charred ends. Around it were boot prints that weren't ours. Dev's tread looks like someone stamped a waffle iron into rubber. Rowan's are narrow with a toe-wear pattern. Mine are wide with a chevron at the front. These were small diamonds with a bar down the center. They circled the pit, stepped once between our tent and Rowan's, and cut toward the low branch where we'd hung a half-hearted food bag. The cooler latch was open. 2 jerky sticks were gone. One of the little aluminum camp spoons was missing off its carabiner. The duct tape roll sat upright on the table like someone had picked it up, used it, and set it down like a trophy. Raccoon, Rowan said, fast like a ruling. Raccoons don't wear boots, Dev said. Ranger? Rowan tried again. At 2 in the morning with no truck in the lot? I said. We studied the boot tread like it might confess. The heel strikes were deep. Someone with some weight, someone not shy about stepping where we'd been. We walked the loop to see if we'd somehow missed neighbors. Nothing. 15 empty pads, no paper tags, no cars. The Ranger kiosk had a faded trail map and the same Back Monday paper. It's funny how quickly people get polite when the obvious explanation is one they don't want. I said we should slide to a site closer to the road. Rowan said that was overreacting and that we'd be giving up the quiet we came for. Dev said we should at least do a real hang and maybe bells on a cord. We split the difference and stayed, because if you've never been truly scared in a campground, your bar for leaving is higher than it should be. The day behaved. We chopped wood, walked the road, sent one text each to let people know we were alive, and made lunch. The wind had that late-season glassy look but didn't push hard. It's a particular quiet you get off-season. Birds someplace else, no kids on bikes, the random mechanical sound of your own zipper weirdly loud. At dusk, the temperature dropped like the ground exhaled ice. We ate a second dinner because the cold made hunger loud. We let the fire collapse and sat around the orange center until it went to black. I zonked out around midnight like a switch flipping. The zipper woke me, not mine. The sound was careful, 2 inches at a time, the teeth parting, stopping, parting again. I sat up. My bag made that nylon gasp and squeak. Hey? I said, not loudly, because I didn't want to sound afraid and my brain thought hearing my own voice would make me real. The zipper froze. I watched the door for a full minute. My eyes watered from staring. Footsteps went away. Same careful scrape and step. I unzipped, stuck my head out, and stared into a flat, uncomplicated dark. The cooler, the car, the suggestion of Rowan's tent. Nothing else. I didn't wake them because I am apparently the sort of person who chooses pride when fear would be smarter. We did the whole system check at sunrise. Tent seams, footprints, anything missing. Another boot mark by the food tree, the duct tape still upright on the table. The same rationalizing conversation in the same voices. Rowan was the first to break the loop. Let's hike, they said. Get out of our heads for a few hours. There's a ridge trail behind the loop that switchbacks to a vista where a fire tower used to sit before the budget died. About 3 miles up, walkable in a light jacket, the kind of trail families do on a good day. We packed light because packing heavy would have felt like conceding something. Water, some food, down layers in case the wind cut at the top. Dev threw in the med kit like they always do. I locked the car and took an extra second to look at our table, our tents, our obviousness, and told myself it would look exactly the same in 3 hours. The first mile was honest. Pine needles, sun in slanted panels, the small satisfaction of placing your feet like it matters. We did the chatter that keeps pace. Snacks. That film Rowan swears is good. The tarp line that could be tighter. Which stove brand actually simmers. The trail ran along the side of the hill with the campground dropping away through the trees. A log had been chainsawed out of the way recently. The cut faces were pale and clean. We took a bad photo. We laughed once. It felt like the morning could be reset by walking. Halfway up, the sound changed. It wasn't dramatic. The wind that had been brushing the crowns muted. The bird noise failed to refill the space. The trail seemed to quiet around our steps like we'd walked into someone else's house. I heard a stick snap behind us, not the brittle snap of a small branch, the clean crack of weight. I turned and saw trees holding still and light in pieces. If you stare long enough, you can build a person where there isn't one. I waited for another sound. None came. You hear that? I asked. Deer, Rowan said, like a spell. Dev didn't answer. They were watching the switchback below us with the cautious, steady look they use when someone's bleeding and trying not to. We kept going because going back immediately felt like admitting the morning hadn't happened the way we wanted it to. 50 yards later, a bit of trash flashed from under a fern tip at the edge of the trail, silver and black. I knew the logo before I picked it up. The fancy jerky brand Rowan had insisted on because it was on sale and tasted like brown sugar and pepper. The tear line was fresh, the inside smear still tacky. I didn't bring jerky, I said. Neither did I, Rowan said. Dev pinched it like evidence and didn't say anything. We turned around without a vote. Not a run, not a comedy speed hike, just that tight, efficient pace you use when the distance between you and a plan is measurable. For the next 5 minutes, the forest sound tracked us like a second set of lungs, small shifts and delayed steps. A twig snapped somewhere in the trees, and then again after we'd moved. The rhythm was wrong, like someone trying to copy our cadence from just far enough away that they couldn't get it right. 3 bends from the trailhead, we heard metal ping on rock. A tiny ring and roll, the sound a knife makes if it kisses stone and then drops into leaves. All 3 of us turned at the same time. A small drift of leaves settled in a spot that hadn't been disturbed the second before. No one spoke. We walked the rest of the way with the clean, stupid focus of people counting something. The loop looked normal from the rise above it. The car sat in the sun. Our sight, table, tents, food tree, made the familiar shapes. The last 50 yards telescoped, the kind of approach where your eyes insist nothing has changed until you're close enough that everything has. Both tents were cut, not a drunken rip. Clean, confidence lines, long, straight, and placed where stress would turn a small cut into a ruin. The sleeping bags lay deflated with their guts pulled out in handfuls, insulation sticking to the dirt in clumps. The cooler was open and off the pad like it had been pushed with a boot. A row of our metal mugs sat rim up on the table, evenly spaced, dumb as cups in a showroom. Our hatchet lay on the bench with the blade pointed toward the car. On the log by the fire ring, someone had placed Dev's toothbrush next to Rowan's journal. It looked staged and casual at the same time. I felt it in my ribs, the fast, empty hollowness you get when the wave you thought you were riding turns out to be the one collapsing on top of you. We went silent. Not because silence was a plan, but because speech would have meant choosing a sentence and no one had one. I walked to the tents and touched one of the cuts. The fabric felt dry and smooth under my fingers. Whoever did this took time. Whoever did this wanted us to see their time. We're leaving, Dev said. No negotiation. Rowan looked at their tent and then at the toothbrush and the journal, and their expression did that short, sharp change I'd only seen on them once before, when a car nearly clipped us in a crosswalk. He was here long enough to get bored, they said. We moved. We didn't pack so much as scoop. Stakes yanked and thrown instead of pulled and wrapped. Lines cut instead of untied. Things that would have been precious yesterday, steaks, ground cloth, extra clothes, went into the trunk loose or didn't go at all. I broke camp badly and didn't care. Dev stood on the bench to get the tarp line loose and almost slid off it because the bark was dusty and their boots were slick. I crammed the stove and fuel into a corner of the trunk. Rowan tossed their entire duffel into the back seat and then threw a loose pile of whatever after it. The only sound was our own rushed inventory. Then the quiet changed again. My head knew it before my ears did. Even our zippers sounded naked. The air flattened. The space between us felt used. I saw movement behind the car and almost said Rowan's name, and then I realized it wasn't Rowan. A man stepped out from the trees opposite the fire ring like he'd just remembered he owned that piece of ground. He was thinner than his clothes, pale where the skin showed, wearing a combination of layers that didn't make sense together. His hair was long and flat, his beard uneven, like trimming had been a series of decisions made with dull tools. In his right hand, he held a fixed blade knife with a stained drop point. Not huge, not small. He didn't raise it. He didn't say anything. He looked at us like people look at a table they've set. Dev said my name. The sound had an indoor quality, as if space had tightened around us. He walked. Not a sprint. A steady, off rhythm, a soft forward lean like his knees hurt. When he lifted the knife to waist level, it wasn't a threat gesture so much as a habit, the way you carry something you've been holding for a while. I tried the dumb word that makes no difference. Hey, I said. Nothing changed. He closed the distance faster than I'd believed he would because my idea of speed indoors didn't apply out here. He feinted toward Dev and cut in the same motion. Dev jerked back but not fast enough. The blade opened their forearm in a straight, economical line. The noise was small. The blood wasn't dramatic at first. That made it worse. Rowan moved the way people move when the decision has already been made. One step forward. Clean. No wind-up. I reached for the hatchet and remembered it was on the bench behind him. I grabbed his knife wrist instead, which is something you do when your brain is behind events. He yanked back with a strength that didn't match his frame. The blade flashed, and my body did the odd thing where it pretends it's observing calmly while everything inside screams. "Move," Rowan said, urgent but flat, and then they had the hatchet. I don't know when they picked it up. 1 second it was on the bench, the next it was in their hand. They swung once and didn't miss. The hatchet bit into his forearm just above the wrist, a hard, ugly sound like wood with wet in it. It stuck for a beat and came clean. He made a sound that wasn't a scream, more a forced cough that jumped into a bark. The knife dropped, hit dirt, bounced, and lay there blade up like a staged photo. He stepped back, and in that step I felt how light he was. Blood ran to his fingers, dripped off the tip, dotted the ground, then came faster. He looked from the hatchet to us and then to the edge of the trees. His eyes gave me nothing. Not anger, not pain, nothing to hang a story on. He pivoted and vanished into the brush the way he'd come, soft and fast. "Car," Dev said, voice clipped. "Now." We moved like we'd rehearsed it wrong and were trying to salvage the scene. I grabbed the knife with my jacket and threw it in the trunk because leaving it on the ground felt like failing a test I didn't understand. Dev wrapped their arm with a bandana from their pocket and held it high because training had a chance to outrun fear. Rowan kept the hatchet in their hand like it was glue. I don't remember opening my door. I was behind the wheel, the key turned, the engine caught, and then gravel shot and popped under the tires like hail as we fishtailed onto the loop. I didn't look in the rear view for 50 yards. When I did, he was in the road. A bent shape with one arm hanging too low and his mouth maybe open, or maybe that was a line of sun. Then the trees took him, and then the turn took the trees, and then we were out. We hit cell service by a gas station that sold live bait and had a mural of a trout painted over cinder block. I parked slanted. Dev went inside for paper towels and tape and came out with gauze because the clerk had sense. I dialed 911 and said the words in the order they want. Where we were, what had happened, how many, injuries. The dispatcher's calm made me feel ridiculous and then grateful. A sheriff's car arrived, then a ranger in a uniform that already looked tired. We told the same story twice, once fast, once slow. They asked the ritual questions without making them sound like accusations. Did he say anything? Which direction did he go? Were there vehicles? Had we seen anyone else since yesterday? Had we touched anything that wasn't ours? I told them about the steps at night, the zipper, the prints, the jerky wrapper, the toothbrush and journal on the log, the attack, the hatchet, the blood. Dev's bandage leaked a little through gauze. Rowan's knuckles had a new split from where the hatchet haft bit in. The ranger had that face people practice when they're trying to level with you without adding fuel. He said there had been reports the last 2 months. Not many. Food gone in the night, camps disturbed, people turning back on the ridge because it felt wrong. No one had made contact he could document. He said they'd post a closure notice and run a sweep. He did not say the word squatter, but it hung there. The deputy took the hatchet and the knife in paper bags. He told Dev to go to urgent care for stitches and a tetanus booster. He told us someone would call. They asked if we were up for driving back to the entrance while they went in to take a look and maybe look for tracks. It was obvious they didn't want us at the site. We followed the deputy to the kiosk and parked under the bulletin board with the faded map. I tried not to imagine them standing where we had, looking at the same neat row of mugs and the same straight slashes. When they came back, the deputy had more forms and the exact tone of voice people use when they don't want to scare you with the part they left out. He said they'd be clearing the loop and hiking the ridge. He said to expect a call. He said not to return to recover anything until someone cleared it. We said okay and meant it. We drove home in segments. Dev texted photos from urgent care with a picture of their forearm and 6 stitches that looked too tidy for how my brain remembered the cut. The PA wrote clean slice on the discharge printout, which didn't change the fact of it. Rowan kept their phone in their lap and their fingers on the hatchet handle like letting go would undo something. I pulled into my place, carried gear to the kitchen table, stared at all of it, and walked away twice before I could make myself put anything anywhere. When I did, I found a lighter I didn't recognize in the side pocket of my duffel. Not new. Scuffed metal, a strip of fabric tape around the bottom like someone's idea of a grip. It sparked. It had fuel. I set it on the counter and looked at it for a long time because I couldn't afford to give it a story that would sit in my head rent-free. Maybe it was mine and I was wrong. Maybe it fell out of someone else's bag. Maybe it was his. There wasn't a version that made me feel better. The ranger called the next day to say the loop was closed and they'd found signs of habitation a ways off trail. Nothing they could show me, nothing I wanted to see. They asked if we needed anything from the site. I told them to toss the ruined tents. I didn't drive back. I didn't want another image to carry. We talked as a trio once, on a call that tripped and stalled until we let it end itself. We said the easy lines. Glad we're okay. That was insane. Let's check in if the ranger calls again. We didn't discuss camping. I didn't bring up the lighter. No one suggested a date for a replacement trip. I don't have a neat moral here. I'm not going to say I learned a lesson about vigilance or the kindness of strangers or the cruelty of isolation. The story is the story. We set up on Site 19. Someone watched us. He went through our food at night, then our things. He followed us up the ridge, doubled back while we were gone, cut our tents, arranged our mugs, and waited. He stepped into the open when our hands were full of our lives. He used a knife. Rowan used a hatchet. We left. A ranger closed a loop. I put a lighter in a bag and then in a box because part of me wanted proof that the whole weekend wasn't just my head taking a bad turn. If you need more than that, I don't have it. If you camp in late fall and you hear footsteps and you see prints that aren't yours, move sites. If your zipper eases open by itself, wake your friends. If you feel watched, believe yourself. That's all.